Chapter 188. Tomb opens suddenly. The strongest tyrannical master made an appearance. He was much more tyrannical than all the masters who arrived so far. His aura was soaring to the heavens, and he was certainly not trying to conceal it from others. However, he didn't wait for the people to get over their panic and suddenly torn a void in the space and rushed towards the panic-stricken experts. One could easily see that this guy was incomparably rampant than any other experts already present there. Everyone looked. It was actually a young master. He indifferently looked at the crowd of experts, as if he was looking down on everyone. Yi Shiwen was actually quite surprised for a moment because from the body of this human expert, he could actually sense the same aura as he sensed from Qi Fifan. He actually possessed a very similar breath to Qi Fifan, an extraordinary breath which was simply beyond the reach of any truth-level expert. Half-step legendary realm. Suddenly, an idea emerged in Yi Ziwen's mind that this was definitely a half-step legendary figure, exceptionally formidable, not one bit inferior to Qi Fifan. But soon, Yi Shiwen relaxed and stopped the rigorous thinking about this, because even in Great Yu State, there were 4 half-step legendary level strongest true disciples in Yuan School, and there were many half-step legendary experts in the younger generation of other major sects as well. So, considering that East China Sea was so vast, though it was said to be comparatively less densely populated than Great Yu State, but how could it not have any half-step legendary characters among the top players of younger generation? Yi Shiwen no longer surprised to see a half-step legendary master at this place. The experts were quite startled at the sudden emergence of this peerless master, but Shang Guan of the great island of the immortals was the only one whose complexion suddenly paled and his eyes instantly filled with killing intention. Who is this man, and why does Shang Guan hold such an intense killing intention for him? Don't you know? He is a famous expert, who first rose to fame about 100 years ago. This man is named Mo Shui. More than 100 years ago, he was once a disciple of Great Island of the Immortals and was considered the super genius at that time. He was actually a highly cultured genius. A lot of people said that the Great Island of the Immortals had trained him for the sole purpose of leading them in the future, but then no one knows what happened and Mo Shui actually betrayed them. Later, many experts of the Great Island of the Immortals chased him down to eradicate him, but they all perished in his hands. One of the perished pursuers was the elder brother of Shang Guan. They say that the relationship between Shang Guan and his brother was very good. It could be said that from childhood he grew up in the care of his elder brother, but he never thought that his elder brother would actually die in the hands of Mo Shui. Since then, Shang Guan has been constantly tracking down Mo Shui in all directions, everywhere just to kill him and take revenge for his elder brother's death. But Shang Guan should not be the opponent of Mo Shui, right? How can he possibly pursue him? Who knows, but there are lots of misgivings between the two. A half-step master of legendary realm was considered very tyrannical, on par with peerless masters like Qi Fifan, who were considered incomparably super strong experts by the peers. When one such peerless master suddenly appeared in this devil commander's tomb, everyone's heart sank. No expected that such a terrifying master would come here. Now, did the other people have a chance left? Mo Shui, you traitor, you actually dared appear in front of me. Shang Guan looked coldly at Mo Shui and said in a loud voice, "You seem to have grown up and look more and more like your elder brother." Mo Shui said, and it seemed like looking down on Shang Guan, but from his facial expression, he appeared somewhat immersed into the past. Damn you, you better not play hypocrite in front of me. My brother dead in your hands, not to mention you two used to be best friends. At the time of his death, he said that I must not chase after revenge. Shang Guan said angrily, "Your brother said right, if you go on like this, you will die." Mo Shui spoke as the corners of his mouths curled up, revealing a strange smile. And the next instant, with a whiz, Mo Shui's figure, which seemed to have worn the space itself, instantly arrived in front of Shang Guan and he said, "It is not something you can intervene. Go to hell." Shang Guan was the type of guy who would easily swallow the bait. He immediately punched straight toward Mo Shui and the released Quan Jin began to crumble the space. This was the attack power of a master of truth 9th stage, potent enough to shock everyone. However, Mo Shui gently dodged Shang Guan's fist attack, and in the same instant he directly pounded his palm on Shang Guan's chest. Immediately, Shangguan spouted a mouthful of blood and his body was sent flying far away. Mo Shui was simply tyrannical and invincible, even if Shangguan possessed the strength of Truth 9th stage, but it was very difficult for him to compete with Mo Shui. As this breathtaking scene unfolded in front of Yi Shiwen, he finally understood that after achieving the strength of half-step legendary realm, one could obtain a part of the valiance of legendary masters. In fact, after breaking through from Truth 9th stage to half-step legendary realm, there was an increase in strength by almost thousands times or even more. However, although the strength of Shangguan was not very large in comparison, it was not weak either, because he was not very far from stepping into half-step legendary realm. The gap between Truth 8th stage and Truth 9th stage was not very big in comparison to the gap between Truth 9th stage and half-step legendary realm. Mo Shui fully demonstrated the strength of half-step legendary realm, but Yi Shiwen was able to feel that he didn't have any killing intent towards Shangguan, otherwise, he would probably already be dead by now. Now, Yi Shiwen somewhat understood why even in a huge sect like Yuan School, although there were many experts at Truth 9th stage but only few experts like Qi Fifan were called pro-disciples. In fact, there were only 4 strongest true disciples, and looking at their potential, one of them was supposed to become the head of the sect in the future. Although there are many ambitious disciples in the sect, but there was no way for them to compete with these 4 pro-disciples because they had already achieved the half-step legendary realm, and the huge gap between this realm and Truth 9th stage was simply unimaginable. While they were almost going to clash again, suddenly, a loud noise echoed and the middle portion of the Bone Mountain finally started to open, and soon, the entrance to the tomb completely opened, revealing that there was a world of things of its own on the inside, including vegetation, stone structures and so on. But this tomb also had a rather grave nature, and after a certain time, it would collapse and enter into a rapid aging period. At this moment, there was no way to cover up the endless amount of aura from the treasures and vigorous Lingqi trapped inside the tomb for ages, and it finally seethed out. Everyone was suddenly excited because they could clearly sense Devil Commander's entire life savings. It was said that Devil Commander had always been going on expeditions throughout his life, and all of his accumulated was present in this tomb, which was simply innumerable, difficult to count. At this moment, the space fluctuated violently and a figure rushed inside the tomb at a lightning speed. Yi Shiwen saw that it was none other than Mo Shui. He was the fastest and quite decisive, so he didn't waste any time and immediately rushed inside. The next master to rush inside was Shangguan, who, like a mighty torrent, directly rushed inside the tomb. Shangguan was closely following Mo Shui. At this time, he was stubbornly chasing Mo Shui. He had already forgotten about Devil Commander's treasure, his initial motive to come here. Right now, his mind was fully focused on one thing, that he must kill Mo Shui, the killer of his elder brother, and take revenge. Following closely behind Shangguan was Bai Wuhan and other peerless experts, rushing instantly inside the tomb on rainbows. Yi Shiwen also launched his devil wings, and at an extremely fast speed he instantly rushed inside the tomb. His figure was just like a black shadow and he was much faster than many experts behind him. Although he possessed the weakest cultivation among all, a mere cultivation of Truth 2nd stage, but relying on the speed granted by the devil wings, his speed was now comparable to the speed of Truth 9th stage masters like Shangguan, Bai Wuhan, etc. All of these peerless masters were the first to rush inside, and that too at terrifying speeds. Yi Shiwen directly charged in, and once he was inside, he glanced around the tomb, which was definitely luxurious enough. It was completely inlaid by legendary glowing pearls, which appeared exceptionally luminous. But for truth-level masters like Yi Shiwen, as long as there was even a single ray of light, it would seem little different to them from daytime. But at this time, these magnificent gold and jade glowing pearls actually began to crack, and several glowing pearls instantaneously collapsed, crumbled into powder and carried away with the wind. This indicated that the tomb had actually come to the end of its life. These immortal glowing pearls had been originally sturdy for thousands of years, but now, they actually crack and disintegrated. Yi Shiwen flapped his devil wings. The speed of his flight was very fast, but still lagging behind those peerless experts because the sheer difference in skill between them was really too large. The current passage of this tomb was still paved with bones of the dead as before, but compared to outside, these bones were exuding formidable breaths. Almost immediately after Yi Shiwen flew in, the bones of the dead piled up in the passage rose back to life, and within moments, an insanely formidable army of skeletons appeared in the passage. According to the skeleton army sequence, the experts to be aimed at were Yi Shiwen and the other experts flying behind him. "Shoot the arrows." Everyone only heard a cold voice that came from the skeleton army. Suddenly, innumerable skeleton soldiers shot the bone arrows towards the rushing experts, and the passage was not very big, not to mention there were so many skeleton soldiers who together shot innumerable bone arrows almost at once. Almost in a flash, a massive curtain of arrows formed and quickly blocked the entire space of the passage. The tyrannical strength of these skeleton soldiers was far beyond the imagination of ordinary people. Each and every one of them was a master of truth level, and even the weakest among them was a master of truth 5th stage. Although these were only bone arrows and one arrow won't pose much threat, but when facing several thousands of these arrows, it was simply like living through a horrifying nightmare. This airtight rain of arrows was basically a nightmare for the experts. Secret rain clouds. While the devil wings were constantly flapping behind Yi Ziwen's back, he shot his palm out and a faint dragon roar resounded. The huge palm shadow immediately congealed above Yi Shiwen and positioned in front of his body in order to protect him from the attacks, while Tianyuan Mirror also activated and released Scarlet Curtain to protect his body. Bang! 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 The rain of arrows was easily blocked by Yi Ziwen's impenetrable palm shadow. His whole body was shielded by the palm shadow and the arrow rain was simply unable to approach him. He directly rushed through the endless rain of bone arrows, but for so many experts behind him, unfortunately, they didn't have such good luck. Although most of them were at higher cultivation compared to Yi Shiwen, but they didn't possess ancient martial technique like Tyrant Body Technique, which could literally turn his skin hard like iron. Neither did they have Tianyuan Mirror to protect their bodies. Chapter 189 Blood-Robed Ancestor Beheaded. Pucci. 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 There were many experts who couldn't evade the bone arrows, and their whole body essence and blood was instantly absorbed by the void, while at the same time, the bodies of skeleton soldiers started to grow flesh and blood. This whole scene was very frightening. After the blood and essence of these experts was absorbed by the skeleton soldiers, a bright green flow flashed in their eyes. It seemed like some of the memories of their past lives had been restored, making them even more bloodthirsty than before. At this time, Yi Shiwen didn't have time to attend to other people. He didn't want to fall in the trap of these skeleton soldiers, so he directly flew deeper into the tomb. There were several passages, and each of these passages led to different direction, much like a maze of intertwined paths. As Yi Shiwen advanced further inside, he lost track of the peerless experts who were flying in front of him all this time. Their breaths dispersed in different directions and vanished without a trace after some time. Yi Shiwen was not in a hurry to go forward, but resorted to using Tianyuan Mirror to sought for Mochi in the deepest places of the tomb, but at this time, a large group of powerhouses rushed there in abundance from behind. Like Yi Shiwen, they also managed to get past the ambush of skeleton soldiers. But after arriving there, these experts immediately separated and rushed into various channels. There were many demon beasts also present among them. All of these experts who managed to get past the ambush were tyrannical powerhouses. Yi Shiwen also chose a passage and sped along it. Then, abruptly, the Lingqi began to seethe up violently throughout the tomb, and several Jin arrangements, spread across the entire tomb, suddenly activated. Upon sensing the intruders, these Jin methods activated spontaneously. Suddenly, an enormous devil coercion pressed down, although it didn't seem like the coercion belonged to the devil commander himself, but the horrifying coercion indicated that the coercion belonged to a terrifying devil expert, whose strength was way beyond the legendary realm, probably in the realm above the legendary realm. At this time, the endless coercion pressed down and all of the experts suddenly staggered and were almost crushed by it. They could only resist this coercion by covering their bodies with Zhen Yuan, and as a result, the strengths of these masters decreased several times, and their cultivation suffered a decrement of almost 3 stages. The tyrannical experts, all of a sudden, became much weaker while on the contrary, the skeleton soldiers became more formidable. Now, if they were not careful and received even a single strike from the bone swords, then nothing would save them from becoming food and nourishment for skeleton soldiers. For others, it was a big calamity, but it was not an issue for Yi Shiwen because the coercion of Devil Commander didn't affect him at all. He had Tianyuan mirror to shield his body, and it was actually the tool of Devil King himself. So at Yi Zaiwen's current skill, Devil Commander's coercion didn't have any effect on him. Yi Shiwen was speeding all the way until he stopped before a wall when Tianyuan mirror felt an intensely fluctuating Lingqi behind the wall. Perhaps there was another world behind it. Yi Shiwen didn't waste time and directly used Coiling Dragon Palm to tear open the wall. Sure enough, it was really amazing as Yi Shiwen anticipated. As Yi Shiwen went inside, he immediately saw magnificent scenery everywhere, consisting of a large river of Lingqi. Yi Shiwen took a deep breath and felt as if several arteries suddenly blossomed and opened up throughout his body. Numerous heavenly treasures were floating in the river of Lingqi, and there were some who were even on the verge of attaining spiritual wisdom, which was very rare. The amount of treasures present in this cavern was enough to make Yi Shiwen rich overnight. Yi Shiwen, this is a good opportunity, Yi Amo said in an excited manner. At present, you have done enough accumulation at your current level, and this river of Lingqi contains the most suitable energy. If you absorb it, your strength will immediately have a breakthrough. Yi Shiwen was suddenly overjoyed. There was certainly endless amount of wealthy in this Devil Commander's tomb, and that too much more than he originally expected. Yi Shiwen was about to start collecting the treasures, when suddenly, a loud shout came from behind him. "Not so fast, boy, stop right there. This blood-robed ancestor has taken a liking for this place and the treasures." At this time, Yi Shiwen turned around and saw a very old man, clad in blood-stained robe. There was an ominous and vicious expression on his face. "I first discovered this place, but now, you actually intend to snatch it from me?" Yi Shiwen said as he coldly looked at that old man. "Snatch from you? Do you think a petty junior of Truth Second Stage has the right qualifications to discuss conditions with a senior like me?" The blood-robed ancestor laughed loudly. It was obvious that he was openly looking down on Yi Shiwen. In his heart, he was actually paying no attention to Yi Shiwen because in his eyes, Yi Shiwen was just a junior of Truth Second Stage and nothing, while he himself was an old expert of Truth Seventh Stage. He was considered a rampant, fierce, and quite an illustrious character throughout the East China Sea. From his words, it was obvious that he didn't plan to show any mercy to Yi Shiwen. "Well, then why don't you try and find out yourself whether I am eligible to talk conditions with you?" Yi Shiwen sneered. If few moments ago, the Devil Zhen method had not activated, then he would certainly turn away right now without staying a moment, but now the situation was entirely different. "You are courting death. This old man is speaking properly with a brat like you, so you should be honored." The blood-robed ancestor looked sharply at him with his sword-like piercing gaze. "You have brought about your own destruction, so later don't blame the old man for this." He thundered loudly and instantly released an enormous sword light, congealing a huge mountain of sword in the midair, gigantic and mighty, which immediately pressed down towards Yi Shiwen. A cruel light flashed in the eyes of blood-robed ancestor. In his view, Yi Shiwen certainly could not withstand his attack. Even if right now, he was unable to fully display his full strength, but this much strength was enough to completely obliterate Yi Shiwen, considering he was merely a master of Truth Second Stage and was also under the suppression effect. So right now, his strength level should be probably in the Xiantian realm. "Arrogant old geezer, you are acting recklessly. You better not start asking for mercy now because it won't change anything. Today is the day you die." Yi Shiwen narrowed his eyes and said. This blood-robed ancestor was trying to bully him, thinking that Yi Shiwen was some weakling who wouldn't dare to fight back, but how could Yi Shiwen possibly take it lightly? Suddenly, layer upon layer waves of profound and vigorous Zhen Yuan exploded out of Yi Zaiwen's body and simultaneously released a terrifying breath, which was much more tyrannical than the breath of blood-robed ancestor. "Impossible!" Blood-robed ancestor looked incredibly at Yi Shiwen because he just couldn't believe how he was able to display his full strength even under the suppression. Not to mention, this extent of strength should be unachievable for a master of truth second stage. Yi Shiwen shot out his palm and it was instantly wrapped in Zhen Yuan, taking form of a dragon claw and pressed down toward the sword mountain to directly grasp it. Boom! That seemingly endless sword mountain was directly grabbed by Yi Shiwen and exploded. The explosion caused the sword mountain to disintegrate and dissolve into endless sword light which instantly filled the space. Blood-robed ancestor saw this terrifying scene and almost did not faint from the shock, but Yi Shiwen did not want to give him enough time to calm down. He directly opened his devil wings and instantly appeared in front of the old man, while at the same time, his palm turned into a dragon claw and directly grasped the Zhen Yuan protective cover around the old man's body. The Zhen Yuan couldn't withstand the enormous strength present in the dragon claw and exploded almost immediately, and the dragon claw advanced towards the skinny body of the blood-robed ancestor. Blood-robed ancestor did not expect that Yi Ziwen's speed would be so fast, but not just that, he never thought that Yi Ziwen's offensive would actually be so swift and sharp, and it was simply unimaginable that he would possess such tyrannical strength even under the suppression effect. He was caught off guard by Yi Shiwen and a chunk of his flesh and bones were instantly torn off by the dragon claw, scattering bone dust, flesh and blood in all directions. Ah! Blood-robed ancestor screamed and quickly retreated, while chunks of flesh and blood fell off along the way of his retreat. He immediately knew that this time, he did the biggest mistake of his life by kicking this iron wall. It didn't take him long to realize that he had encountered a monster, that Yi Shiwen was not actually an expert of truth second stage and must be concealing his real cultivation, which was probably above his own cultivation. He couldn't possibly contend with an expert like Yi Shiwen who was just pretending to be a truth second stage but in reality was a tyrannical expert. Blood-robed ancestor's heart immediately sank. If only he was not in this damned place, if only his strength was not limited, he would have torn this extremely arrogant junior to shreds, making him know the extent of his fierceness, making him witness the fate of those who dared to offend him. But how could Yi Shiwen let him escape? Tianyuan mirror instantly flew and the scarlet light irradiated upon him, wrapping him completely. Then, Yi Shiwen directly rushed towards him. His figure flashed just like the black lightning, and in an instant, he arrived in front of blood-robed ancestor. Yi Ziwen's palm turned into dragon claw and directly clutched him in its grasp and crushed him. Blood-robed ancestor only had enough time to utter a pitiful scream. A guy who ran amok throughout the East China Sea, killing countless experts at whim, doing all kinds of evil things as he wished, but today he was killed by a youngster like Yi Shiwen, and his essence was completely absorbed by Tianyuan mirror. Tianyuan mirrors suddenly began to transform. One must know that although Yi Shiwen was able to behead blood-robed ancestor, but it was all thanks to the special devil enchantment. Yi Shiwen just relied on the suppression effect of this tomb and managed to behead on weakened blood-robed ancestor. If it was in an ordinary situation, then at that time, Yi Shiwen would be killed instead. However, although blood-robed ancestor was suppressed, but he was actually an expert of truth 7th stage, so his essence, blood and flesh were obviously going to be tyrannical and potent when absorbed by Tianyuan mirror. But no matter how powerful an expert actually was, Yi Mo could easily and completely absorb and digest them in one fell swoop. So long as blood-robed ancestor's flesh and essence was completely digested by the prestigious Tianyuan mirror, it could be fully restored to truth 5th stage, and then, its scarlet rays, when irradiated upon, would be able to quickly kill experts of truth 5th stage with ease. Yi Shiwen also started to collect these treasures. This endless river of Lingxi had many heavenly treasures which could be added to Yi Ziwen's precious wealth collection, and were enough to help him in directly breaking through to the truth 3rd stage. When Yi Shiwen would have the breakthrough to truth 3rd stage, he would actually obtain enough strength to contend with experts of truth 5th stage. In fact, he would be able to achieve the fighting strength of the so-called small truth realm in one fell swoop. By that time, in this tomb, so long as he wouldn't mess with Mo Shui, Shangguan and few other experts of truth 9th stage and above, he could completely ran amok because the remaining experts would no longer pose a threat to him. Chapter 190 Truth Third Stage in the Big Sarcophagus. Yi Shiwen had shielded the surrounding environment and entered a different space. The space in this tomb was very disorderly and hence was easily torn open by Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen tore a human-sized hole in this space and hid inside it. Of course, all of the wealth present in that cavern had already been seized by him and stored in Tianyuan Mirror. At this time, Tianyuan Mirror was exuding bright and dazzling light while the breath also changing slowly and becoming more and more powerful as it was absorbing and digesting the flesh, blood and essence of blood-robed ancestor. And Zhen Yuan was also wildly revolving within his body. With each breath, a long stream of Lingqi entered into his body and his breath was increasing crazily. There was an endless amount of Lingqi present in the river of Lingqi, which was helping Yi Shiwen in crazy enhancement of his strength. A huge coiling dragon was rising and vanishing alternately behind Yi Shiwen, which made him appear like the dragon god himself. One could see the dragon ghost sitting beside Yi Shiwen and blinking. There was an aggressive overflow of energy in the surroundings of Yi Shiwen. It seemed as if an ancient overlord had reincarnated, sweeping away everything. In addition to the rapid promotion in cultivation, Yi Shiwen also practiced various martial techniques in the river of Lingqi. He was also able to practice each of these techniques to higher levels. Yi Shiwen took advantage of this excess amount of Lingqi to actually comprehend Tyrant Body Technique to the fourth layer. A golden yellow light enveloped his body as a result of it. From afar, he appeared like a golden statue, sitting in utmost silence and enlightenment. Yi Ziwen's breath finally increased and reached the peak level. Only a slight step was needed to complete the transformation, then he would leave the second stage of Truth Realm behind after having a breakthrough and step into Truth Third Stage. At this time, perhaps, he would already have broken into the third stage, but since he had practiced Tyrant Body Technique, so the retaining capacity of his body surpassed ordinary masters of Truth Second Stage, and cells throughout his body were able to accommodate huge amounts of Zhen Yuan, after being quenched by Lingqi, which made his body strong to outrageous proportions. However, at the same time, it caused difficulties for Yi Shiwen to have a breakthrough when compared to an average martial artist, but it also made him much more powerful than experts at the same cultivation level. The only disadvantage was the insanely increased difficulty to break through than the average experts, which was increasing exponentially with each breakthrough. Yi Shiwen felt the pores opening throughout his body and there was continuous throughput of Lingqi being crazily absorbed into his body. Yi Shiwen finally reached the limit and rushed past in one fell swoop. Boom! Lingqi was surging and being absorbed by Yi Ziwen's body at an extremely faster rate and finally reached the saturation level in his body, then suddenly expanded and Yi Shiwen opened his eyes. He finally went a step further, reaching the third stage of Truth Realm, and with his current strength, he could easily contend with experts of Truth Fifth Stage. In this tomb, excluding Mo Shui, Bai Wuhan, Shangguan and few others, none of the remaining experts would pose a threat to him. And even if he was not the match of Mo Shui and the other peerless masters, but if he bumped into them, he was confident that they would not be able to kill him and he would easily get out. Yi Shiwen was full of confidence. In a while, Tianyuan Mirror finally also broke through. The bloody circle instantly diffused one after another and an extremely tyrannical aura was released out from Tianyuan Mirror. Yi Mo flew out of Tianyuan Mirror. He looked very happy and said while laughing, "Finally restored, now the likes of Imperial Guards are no longer your match, no need to be afraid of them anymore. Even that 8th prince is no longer a threat. You can easily take him on. But now, you shouldn't delay anymore, otherwise the hidden treasures of Devil Commander will be seized by other experts. Those are boundless wealth and will play very important role in your future practice." Yi Mo further explained. Yi Shiwen nodded. He was thinking that he could not continue to practice here. One day he would step into Legendary Realm and would also step into the realm after that. There was endless practice lying in front of him, and in comparison to others, he was much more dependent on external means of practice in order to break through, which was especially difficult for him. But Yi Shiwen had continued to bravely progress forward. This was the reason why Yi Shiwen never let go of any of the items he came across, not just because these items actually added to his wealth, but his practice itself depended on them. If not for those items, he would not have achieved his current level. Because for others, their dependence upon external force would only make them to develop a very unstable foundation. Therefore, many people, who practice devil ways or evil ways, perished when their bodies exploded as a result of practicing some external form of force, but this was not the case for Yi Shiwen. Others people had to face hidden dangers of progressing by leaps and bounds, because they first mistakenly raised their skill, resulting in the rapid progress in skill but lack of inner state, eventually resulting in their bodies to explode and perish. Just like a reservoir, if it could accommodate 1 million liters of water, and then suddenly out of nowhere, 2 million liters of water is poured in, ultimately, it would lead to the explosion of boundary. But this was not the same for Yi Shiwen because if his cultivation method was taken into consideration, there was a simultaneous expansion of the reservoir along with the introduction of extra water, and, no matter how much water was filled in, there would be a constant expansion of the reservoir, thereby nullifying the chance of any sort of overload or overflow. These problems would simply never appear in front of him. As long as there were enough spirit stones, then Yi Ziwen's skill would progress faster and faster, hence his cultivation level would also upgrade quicker, complementing the growth of each other and progressing together. While other experts could not do such a thing, so they needed to stop at each step in order to consolidate their inner states after each breakthrough. Then Yi Shiwen made up his mind and started collecting treasures from the cavern. One after another, caverns were discovered Yi Shiwen and then thoroughly looted. These caverns were hidden behind the walls and for average people, it was simply impossible to find them, only some obvious caverns were easy to discover. But the same didn't apply to Yi Shiwen, because he was the owner of Tianyuan Mirror, which was extremely sensitive to both Mochi and Lingqi being released by various treasures, therefore could easily discover these treasure quickly. On the way, he also encountered some people who intended to seize his wealth, but how could he take it lightly? Unless he was facing those peerless experts, all others were simply not his match. Those who intended to rob Yi Ziwen's wealth were all beheaded by him. Yi Shiwen quickly received all of the wealth from the beheaded experts. And considering the wealth he collected on this trip to Devil Commander's tomb, he guessed that although there was not much material wealth, but since he always used to have a drought of spirit stones which were so vital for his practice, it could be said that for a long time he should not have worry about lack of spirit stones. At this time, top-grade spirit stones were piled up in Tianyuan Mirror, and among which, there were a lot of best-quality spirit stones as well. In the end, this trip was certainly not in vain. However, these were not the most important. The most important place was the tomb's main chamber where Devil Commander died in a sitting posture. That was the most precious thing. But that main chamber was located in the depths of the tomb, and one needed to penetrate directly through the tomb to reach there. Only after entering the depths, Yi Shiwen would be able to receive the wealth hidden in the tomb. As he continued to go deeper and deeper, finally, all the passages merged into one main passage. At this time, several experts could be seen in this passage. Originally, these experts had separated after taking various different passages, but in the end, they once again gathered in this main passage, and right now, they were attacking the tomb door. At this time, several magic puppets were guarding the tomb door. They belonged to a variety of mechanical puppets, powered by spirit crystal. These puppets were very valiant, although were merely at the 5th stage of Truth Realm, but under the suppression effect of Devil Zhen method, all of the intruders found it very difficult to deal with them. Among them, the most powerful was the double-headed crocodile demon beast. He was also playing the leader of demon beasts, and under his leadership, the tomb door was being attacked by the demon beasts. Of course, his attacks were the most intense ones, meaning all of the other experts were just waiting, in order to let others strive while themselves benefit as the third party. Of course, that crocodile-headed demon beast was not an idiot, and unlike most demon beasts, he possessed high IQ and was very confident of himself. He thought that no one had the ability to snatch things from him. Yi Shiwen did not go forward rashly, was only observing from a distance because rushing now would simply be of no significance in this situation. This stupid demon beast is being really silly, he is actually trying to take the lead. Does he really think that we will just sit back and do nothing? You are silly, Do you think that he really doesn't know about this? He is just too full of himself, and didn't you see, some of these demon beasts were vigilantly looking towards us, so they are really not that stupid as we thought. But if we do not hurry and when the time comes, all the treasures will fall into their hands, I don't want that. These demon beasts are indeed very powerful and they also despise us humans. Just you wait, when the genuine peerless masters will come into action, then they won't stand a chance. Then we will also have the opportunity to benefit as the third party in a quarrel. From the distance, Yi Shiwen saw those particular demon beasts fighting viciously, although their cultivation was suppressed, but they were still many times more powerful than experts of the similar cultivation level due to their tyrannical flesh and bodies. Although their cultivation was suppressed, but the same was not true for their strong bodies, so at this time, they were the most tyrannical. Precisely because of this, the two-headed crocodile dared to be so blatant from the get-go. The magic puppets were viciously attacked by these demon beasts and soon all exploded with a loud bang. After that, the demon beasts began to attack the tomb door. Although no one knew what kind of material was used in the manufacture of Tomb Chamber's door, but it was very strong. However, it still couldn't withstand the attacks from those demon beasts and soon began to break. Boom! Half portion of the door was blown open, and suddenly, almost endless amount of liquefied Lingqi instantly gushed out. Numerous experts were all prepared. After all, this liquefied Lingqi was very precious because it must have taken several years for Lingqi to get liquefied. Chapter 191. Terrifying sword intention. Many people swallowed their saliva at just the anticipation of so much wealth present inside. It was hard to guess how much treasure was stored inside the tomb's main chamber. You humans are not allowed to approach this place. This is the wealth of our demon beast kingdom. If anyone tried to get closer, then he will be executed on the spot. That double-headed alligator started at the human powerhouses and said in a bell-like ringing voice, "Who do you think you are? Everyone can have a share from this massive pile of treasures. We definitely do not agree with you. Why should we give up on this big opportunity and let you demon beasts take everything?" A human expert clamored, but even before their voice could fall, a water sword instantly went across the sky, directly piercing the air during its advance and penetrated that expert. He struggled for a while but simply couldn't fight back and eventually died. There was a hint of cruel expression on that double-headed crocodile's face. He was abnormal, malicious, and inhumane. He was simply not afraid of humans, and neither did he acknowledge them as equals. He believed that land was the domain of human beings, but ocean was the domain of demon beasts, so why should he be afraid of humans underwater? This quick and decisive double-headed crocodile immediately awed many humans, who witnessed what happened just now with their own eyes. However, those human masters apparently did not appear in the mood to give up. After all, this was the main chamber of Devil Commander's tomb and most precious treasures should be hidden inside. Everyone was well prepared to start any time, staring at the demon beasts, crowded near the entrance. While at the same time, they were using soul searches to chat with each other. What do these muscle-brained demon beasts understand about anything? They actually think they can eat up all the treasures and we will just wait on side and see. They are asking for it. Do not worry, now the door has not fully opened, and when it really opens up, we will see who gets to seize the treasures. Yi Shiwen was in no hurry and quietly hiding. Boom! With a loud noise, both planks of tomb door finally fell. Immediately then, those demon beasts rapidly blocked off the entire door and began to stare covetously at the human experts. Then the two-headed crocodile rushed as the leader of Demon Beast Team. "Everyone, let's go together. These demon beasts are really acting recklessly by thinking that would monopolize all of the treasures and we will just wait and see." Finally someone could not resist. He shouted and rushed forward along with other experts. Boom! Along with a loud explosion, a terrifying Quan Jin rumbled and directly exploded in the middle of Demon Beast crowd. In an instant, many of the demon beasts couldn't dodge in time and directly evaporated in the explosion, while at the same time, a figure flew over from the middle of the crowd. It was Emo Shui. At this time, there was no doubt that Emo Shui's tyrannical strength was fully displayed in front of everyone, and he direct rushed inside the main chamber. Mo Shui went inside, followed by Bai Wuhan and other peerless experts. They rushed through the red pieces of demon beast remains, floating in the surroundings. The arrogance of rampant and domineering demon beasts was instantly broken. The remaining alive demon beasts were immediately outnumbered by the rushing human experts. Although they were very strong individuals, but there were a lot of human experts rushing from all directions. And at this time, Yi Shiwen also rushed among the crowd of experts. As they entered the tomb chamber, they discovered an incomparably spacious open hall, and a sarcophagus was located in the farthest part of the hall, and it was wrapped in an enchantment. Yi Shiwen, be careful, there's a Zhen method inside there. Yi Mo suddenly said to warn Yi Shiwen. Then, abruptly, an incredibly overwhelming sword key blotted out the heaven and earth, unfolding a horrifying scene, which could send shivers down the spine of anyone. No one would have thought that the depths of the tomb would actually turn out to be like this. It did not have huge wealth as they had imagined, but actually had a huge and seemingly dangerous enchantment. Double-headed crocodile, who had run ahead of everyone, was instantly cut by a section of sword key, his blood splashed out and his whole body was sent flying out. Even Mo Shui was unable to escape from this sword key attack, and in a while, he was wounded by it. Not just he, Bai Wuhan and other peerless experts were also unable to dodge. They were quite embarrassed, although their tyrannical power was boundless, but while facing this sword key attack, they simply didn't have the strength to fight back. The long blade danced in Yi Ziwen's hand, and at the same time, his whole body was wrapped in a defensive layer of blade light, but soon, the blade light protective layer was shattered and Yi Shiwen was cut several times. But the good news was that his body was under the protection of Tianyuan Mirror, which granted superb defensive powers to him. So he just received some superficial flesh wounds, which would not pose serious problems. Yi Shiwen was amazed, because a sword intention suddenly jumped up several feet and condensed into an entity. Immediately, in the periphery, the sword key started producing chirping around, as if it was surrendering in front of the sword intention. Sword King. No one could make a guess about the length of time spent by this sword intention, but even after undergoing through endless time, it had been able to have such might. This obviously made it clear to everyone that the owner of this sword intention was definitely a terrifying existence. There were chills in the hearts of all people. This sword intention was just too horrifying. If it really attacked, then perhaps none of them would survive. It could be guessed from the fact that just now, a casual sword key attack pinned 1/3 of experts tightly on the ground. Above the sword intention, an unimaginable form of a person gradually emerged. There was a long sword in his hand. What kind of existence was this? He was tall, grandiose and sturdy. His face was blurred and it was almost impossible to clearly see his facial features. He was standing there with a sheathed double-edged sword. He had a heroic bearing, standing above the sword intention, and appeared like a peerless swordsman. At that moment, the endless sword intention momentarily scattered in all direction inside the chamber, making all of the people present there to have an impulse to submit to this mighty king-like figure. They felt like lowly ants, standing in front of a deity. Everyone knew that it was just Soul Search, not a deity, but still, if the Soul Search was so terrifying, then one could imagine his shocking identity. Pure sword intention was able to totally suppress all of the experts, making their hearts fill up with admiration, and even Yi Shiwen was no exception and admired the elegant demeanor of the opposite party. Yi Shiwen had a hard time imagining that if mere Soul Search could have such elegant charisma, then the real expert would have what kind of terrifying presence. There was complete silence in the tomb chamber. No one dared to speak or issue even a little bit of sound, afraid to alarm this fearful existence. After so many years, eventually, this tomb was actually supposed to be born again someday, and today is the day. The blurred figure thought aloud. Just like the fate, inevitable. You all leave this place, there's nothing here that you seek. The Soul Search figure glanced at the crowd and said, "Senior, there is repression inside." Mo Shui stepped out and said, "No, there's nothing here." The figure shook his head and said, while his sword-like sharp eyes looked at Mo Shui, as if seeing right through him, Do you really think after so long that kind of thing will continue to exist in this world? Everyone's vision immediately shifted towards Mo Shui. He seemed to know the real secret of this place, and perhaps this time, they made a mistake. There was a possibility that this place was simply not just the Devil Commander's tomb, there was something else hidden here, a secret, but Mo Shui looked indifferent and did not give any explanation to anyone. After saying that, the soul search figure suddenly looked at Yi Shiwen and it seemed as if he saw through Yi Shiwen. An astonished look appeared in his eyes, but just for a moment then returned to normal. So it's true, anyone can die, except the peerless geniuses. The soul search sighed with emotion and thought, while seemingly somewhat lost in old memories. I will release each sponsored chapter for $40 received in donations. 3. When I am busy with real life or queue is too long, I will make an announcement and lock the donation button. Chapter 192, Imperial Guards Commander-in-Chief. The reason why Ma Jiao followers were waiting outside was very simple, because this tomb was like the lifetime savings of a ruthless experts, not to mention he was supposedly the Devil Commander, or might even be an unknown Emperor-level master. So it was obvious that there would be layers after layers of traps to stop the intruders. If they rushed inside, then the loss was inevitable. So it was better to wait until the other experts would rush out with the treasures. Their plan was indeed very good, but the unexpected happened and not even the Truth 9th Stage followers were able to escape from the sword key attack that fell from above all of a sudden and crucified them on the ground. They never thought that their plan would backfire and they would be the victims in the end. Then an even more horrifying scene appeared in front of the crowd, along with countless blazing sword key. It seemed as if the entire space was being pierced by infinite swords that fell on the mountains of bones. The bone mountains and the entirety of tomb instantly vaporized from the impact by this terrifying sword key and disappeared in the space turbulence. Later on, no one would be able to tell that something existed here. A cold feeling appeared in the hearts of everyone, because they knew that their treasure hunt was now over, and soon, they would have to leave. Phew! Yi Mo's voice suddenly echoed in Yi Shiwen's mind. That guy was scary. Hey, where were you all this time? Yi Shiwen asked. That guy, just now, I was discovered by him. Yi Mo said. If he wanted to, he could have pulled me out and I would be unable to stop him. I do not know for what reasons, but he ignored my existence. Yi Mo said in a somewhat startled manner. Although he had no idea who that guy was, but he was sure about one thing, that he was scary. That's why until now, Yi Mo didn't dare to come out. That guy's soul search incarnation itself was so scary, one could simply not guess what Thatcheractor's legacy actually was. It seemed like he was trying to suppress the coffin, but in the end, what was exactly hidden in the coffin that needed such a terrifying suppression? Yi Shiwen had a slight feeling that perhaps, in addition to Devil Commander's wealth, there was something else hidden here. But anyway, this time, it could be said that Yi Shiwen's treasure hunt was very productive. He obtained lots of treasures, not an amount that one expert could occupy alone, more than enough even for truth-level experts. Yi Shiwen did not leave immediately, but sat down on the floor and started praying for the deceased souls. There were a lot of seniors who deserved to rest in peace. Those heroes or even the enemies must not be forgotten to rot in resentment, because after death, everyone deserves to be reborn. So Yi Shiwen decided to pray for all of them. As Yi Shiwen continued to recite the prayers, several golden apertures arose from the ground and spread out in a circle around him. The resentment attached to the skeletons were also swept away by the golden apertures and reduced little by little. The shrieks and cries from the lingering resentment calmed down little by little as he continued to pray for their peace. 3 days later, Yi Shiwen was sitting in the sea for 3 full days, reading the prayers aloud. The souls of all of the predecessors who fought here and died finally found peace due to Yi Shiwen's guidance and could finally enjoy the rebirth. Yi Shiwen did not know whether hell or heaven existed in this world, but at least he knew this much, that there existed some almighty power that guided these pitiful souls to their next destination. Perhaps the rumors about the legendary hell also existed in this world, but Yi Shiwen did not know, neither did he want to know. After reciting prayers for 3 days non-stop, Yi Shiwen not only was able to set free countless souls, even his own mind seemed to have been baptized in the process. Originally, he vaguely felt somewhat tired. Since the day he came to this world, all he thought about was survival. Being an ordinary human from a different world, he had to learn to be ruthless. He had to develop conviction to kill people without a single thought, just for the sake of continued survival of himself and his family. He had to struggle to get stronger, but his mind was not at peace. But after 3 days of baptism, now, his spirits were up. After setting free all of the resentment and souls, he finally stood up. It was time to go back. He had been on this trip for 10 days and must go back to Qianji Island. A rainbow appeared under his feet. He turned into a streamer and disappeared from the seabed. Qianji Island had a somewhat lively atmosphere and everyone was excited. The so-called competition among the major forces of Great Yu State was being carried out here. Already, half of the competition was over, and after this competition would be over, perhaps, Qianji Island would become famous throughout the Great Yu State. Above the arena, one of the elite core disciples, Hua Menghan, could be seen standing next to the referee. Yiyuan School's disciple, Hua Menghan, wins today's game. Above the high stand, a partly figure stood up and said in an announcing fashion, "Hasn't Yi Shiwen come back? Their days have already passed. Since he doesn't dare to act, I will not force him so long as he knocks his head 3 times on the ground and admits defeat before His Highness, the 8th Prince." There was a sudden commotion among the disciples, especially the disciples of Yiyuan School. They were staring at that man and clenching their teeth. If Yi Shiwen agreed to knock his head 3 times on the ground and admitted defeat, it would not just be an insult to Yi Shiwen but for entire Yiyuan School. Feng Kong. At this time, Hua Menghan, who was still on the stage, said aloud, "Your demands are too unreasonable. You just decided on your own and issued a challenge without informing anyone. How will Yi Shiwen come to know about this thing about 3 days period? This is purely absurd." Hua Menghan's breath revealed that she had already partially entered the truth realm, and very soon, she would completely step into it. And that figure was actually the Commander-in-Chief of Imperial Guards, Feng Kong. Since the members of Imperial Guards lost at the hands of Yi Shiwen, unexpectedly, their Commander-in-Chief personally went into action. Setting the limit of 3 days was just to leave no room for negotiation for Yi Shiwen, if he was to cross the limit. Humph, that Yi Shiwen has dared to humiliate the members of Imperial Guards, which is capital crime. His Highness doesn't need to act himself, because I will kill him. That figure snorted and said with a cold smile on his face. Although the disciples of Yiyuan School were also present there, but he didn't care and openly announced the death penalty to Yi Shiwen. He was much more overbearing than the other members of Imperial's guards. "Kill me? You think you are capable enough? You cannot achieve such a thing even in your dreams." A mocking voice transmitted from afar and a figure dropped from the sky, right onto the arena and stood next to Hua Menghan. Seeing Hua Menghan, Yi Shiwen nodded slightly to thank her for speaking in his favor. Seeing Yi Shiwen appear suddenly out of nowhere, Hua Menghan was somewhat surprised, but was a little worried as well. After all, everyone knew how terrifying a guy Feng Kong actually. No one would dare to underestimate the Commander-in-Chief of Imperial Guards. Although he was a subordinate of the 8th Prince but was absolutely not strong enough when compared to a powerhouse like 8th Prince. "You are Yi Shiwen?" 2 sharp and piercing eyes focused upon Yi Shiwen, as if trying to see through him in general, but simply could not see through his cultivation. It seemed like Yi Shiwen's body was wrapped in fog and he was able to see through his cultivation. "Well, you seem impatient to die," Feng Kong coldly said and glared at Yi Shiwen, as if looking at a dead person. At this time, Yi Shiwen assessed Feng Kong, who was clad in blue robe. His stature was grandiose and a proud look was spread on his face, like a young hero. It was difficult to imagine that such a peerless genius, a young hero, actually submitted to the 8th Prince. Simply unbelievable. Imperial Guards are nothing but mediocre people, a pathetic bunch of slaves and dogs. Yi Shiwen indifferently said, "I have heard that beating with stick is a good method to tame dogs. It seems your master had taught you well. You're just an ant-like existence. Today I will crush you like a stinking bug." Feng Kong coldly stared at Yi Shiwen. He appeared incomparably overbearing, and one could see that his style was almost similar to that of 8th Prince. Because the members of Imperial Guards were almost all the same, out of style, just like the 8th Prince. If you are really so eager to die, I'll help you out. Yi Shiwen said in a cold voice, bring it on. Killing intention was indiscriminately building up in Yi Ziwen's heart. This Feng Kong was an outstanding disciple, who was later subdued by the 8th Prince and had since been following him, setting up formidable Imperial Guards to serve the 8th Prince. However, the killing intention in Yi Ziwen's heart was surging, because even if Feng Kong was acting up for the prestige of his Imperial Guards, he wouldn't just sit back and do nothing. I cannot wait to kill you, because only with your blood, I will be able to wash off the desecration of His Highness. Feng Kong shouted, and a surge of violent, imposing aura swept across the arena. I will make sure to break each and every bone in your body. Suddenly many people's gazes were focused on the two men. They were waiting for so many days, right, for this moment, and finally, the major drama was going to begin on stage. In fact, several people weren't waiting here to watch the general competition, but were actually eager to witness this battle. Imperial Guards were humiliated by Yi Shiwen, so considering their overbearing personality, how could they let this go? But one expected that the commander-in-chief would personally come out to challenge Yi Shiwen. The strongest subordinate of the 8th Prince actually personally went into action. This obviously showed that 8th Prince was attaching great importance to Yi Shiwen, but it also demonstrated their determination to get rid of Yi Shiwen. Everyone was thinking that if Yi Shiwen managed to sustain this hurdle and safely went back to Yuan School, later, they might be able to see the stunning battle between him and the 8th Prince. They understood that 8th Prince's world conquest had already begun, and Yi Shiwen would always be remembered as a sacrificial victim, a stepping stone. Several members of Imperial Guards were publicizing everywhere that this was going to be an epic battle, not because Yi Shiwen was strong enough and possible 8 Princes match, but because this would open up a new chapter in the history of Great Yu State, and would also be regarded as the first major battle, inciting the beginning of 8th Prince's world domination. I hope your strength is fiercer than your glib lips. Yi Shiwen sneered. Since you want to break my bones, I would like to see whether you have the strength to do it. Chapter 193. Who is crazier than whom? Yi Ziwen didn't conceal the killing intention building up in his heart. In fact, it could be said that none of the two experts was trying to hide the killing intention. Feng Kong was always quite overbearing and considered himself better than anyone, except the 8th Prince. In his eyes, the 8th Prince has a special place, but he believed that in the future, the 8th Prince would surely transform into an absolutely formidable existence, and even a legendary expert like Qi Fifan would not be his match. Not to mention, even now, Qi Fifan and other peerless experts didn't dare to touch the 8th Prince, even though they wanted to get rid of a nuisance like him. But in the case that a peerless expert tried to lay his hands on the 8th Prince, it was simply impossible to have no response from the royal clan. One must know that 8th Prince had several formidable supporters in the royal clan. Without the support from these people, considering the arrogant and despotic character of the 8th Prince, he would already been killed 1,000 times. Because of the existence of support from those old guys, Qi Fifan and the experts of his generation were unable to lay their hands on the 8th Prince. And 8th Prince indeed possessed an unusual heroic greatness among peers. There was almost no strong rival in his generation, thereby making things easier for him, and that's why he continued to act more and more rampantly. However, Yi Ziwen was different because he and 8th Prince could be considered as peers. In fact, he belonged to an even younger generation in comparison to 8th Prince. If Yi Shiwen really ends up beheading the 8th Prince and the people of Royal Clan came into action, then the elder of Yuan School would also have a valid reason to fight for Yi Shiwen. Several disciples and peers died all the time. They continue to die generation after generation, but one must know when to criticize. After all, if Qi Fifan was to be taken into consideration, he was an invincible expert of his generation, a legend, and must have beheaded several peers to reach his current level. It was not like there were not many invincible experts like Qi Fifan in his generation, rather, all of them had already been crushed by him. All of the disciples of Yuan school had their eyes on Yi Shiwen. There was anticipation in their eyes as they were looking at him. Now, no matter what kind of perception they held for him, they were hoping for him to win this battle. Only his victory could make them feel proud and elated. A golden arena was constructed on the seabed. It was made very sturdy, and even truth-level battles should not be able to damage it. At this time, two men were releasing their imposing auras in this golden arena. Hua Minghan arrived early and was observing from the spectators' area. Originally, the disciples of Yuan school were quite worried for Yi Shiwen since Feng Kong had been famous for more than a decade, although as 8th Prince's subordinate, but the extent of his enormous strength was well known, even if somewhat less than 8th Prince, but it was hard to find his rival in the younger generation. But now when they saw that the imposing aura of Yi Shiwen was no less than that of Feng Kong, they were suddenly surprised. Yi Shiwen was giving them pleasant surprises time and time again. The last time was no exception, and neither was this one. Especially on the high stand, Qi Fifan looked at the performance of Yi Shiwen and didn't appear too surprised. It seemed as if he was already expecting this much from Yi Shiwen. He did not expect that Yi Ziwen's imposing aura would be no less than that of Feng Kong. It seems like in the last few days, he again had another fortuitous adventure. This Yi Shiwen is a strange guy. His cultivation rose dramatically and has reached such a high level, whereas a year ago, he was a nobody. But now, a year after joining main sect, he is already considered the leader of younger generation. Not to forget, he is being compared with a legend like Qi Fifan. Everyone was talking among themselves. If you have any last words, say it. Feng Kong coldly stared at Yi Ziwen and said, I should say the same to you, whether you like it or not, but that 8th Prince of yours is going to regret his decision of choosing me as a stepping stone. The killing intention was boiling in Yi Ziwen's chest. The opposite party was trying to completely crush him to fulfill his ambition, so Yi Shiwen couldn't possibly sit back and do nothing. He must teach them a thorough lesson. Then allow me to send you on your way. Feng Kong shouted and instantly struck the long sword in his hand. The endless sword light dazzled the surroundings, while the killing intention was surging everywhere. It seemed as if the killing intention itself had gained substance and burst out together with the sword light, releasing thousands of terrifying swords, which were cutting through the space itself and advancing in the direction of Yi Shiwen. The arena itself was not large, so these many swords instantly filled the arena and directly formed a sea of swords, with sword keys swirling everywhere. The innumerable swords seemed to have formed a huge sword storm in the arena and swept towards Yi Shiwen. Anyone facing this condensed storm of countless swords would shudder and certainly back off. Feng Kong went all out. His killing intention was authentic, and it didn't seem like he planned to go easy in this fight. The sword light was very terrifying and sweeping all over the arena. Yi Ziwen was dressed in black clothes, and in that sword storm he appeared like a small boat, struggling to survive even for one more second and might drown any time. Yi Ziwen was just standing, with hands held behind his back, and it seemed like he was not doing anything. But at that time, a loud roar of dragon resounded and a huge coiling dragon soared up out of nowhere and began circling around Yi Shiwen to shield him in this sword storm. Secret rain clouds. The sword storm instantly made a full-on attack on the coiling dragon, as if to chop it into pieces. Coiling dragon was circling around Yi Ziwen's body and was constantly using its 4 claws to tear off the sword storm whenever the storm tried to approach Yi Shiwen, thereby stopping the storm from getting near him. Sword storms swept everything, while the coiling dragon roared loudly and continued to counterattack. It seemed as if both sides were like mighty and fearful currents, severely hitting each other. The sword storm was about to stop, but at this time, Feng Kong once again moved his hands and his long sword released a terrifying sword light instantly, which appeared to have instantly cut through the space itself and went across the disappearing sword storm and crashed into the huge body of the coiling dragon. But with this, it seemed like Feng Long invited the wrath of the emperor by attacking the coiling dragon. Today I will kill the dragon and use your blood to wash away your sins. Feng Kong shouted. Everyone was stunned because they never thought that from the beginning, the battle between these two would be so horrifying, to the point that several true disciples swallow their saliva. Both of them were evildoers/monsters and just too terrifying. If they were the ones fighting in this battle, and facing such offensive power, then they would have already been beheaded by now. Among the true disciples, there were different competency levels depending on battle strength and cultivation level. For example, Qi Fifan and other peerless experts were considered the strongest in the truth realm. Then there were experts like Luo Yifan, who recently stepped into the realm. Although both Yixuan and Feng Kong were not the strongest among the true disciples, but the level of this fight was enough to disturb many people. You think you are capable enough to be talking about slaying dragons? Yi Ziwen sneered and shot his palm out, which instantly turned into a coiling dragon and went towards the sword storm. Boom! With a loud bang, a huge energy storm swept off and Yi Shiwen directly caught the little sword light in his claws. You talk big but don't tell me this is the limit of your skills. Yi Ziwen sneered and direct squeezed to burst Feng Kong's god sword attack. Then I'll let you see what real swordsmanship is. Boom! A terrible sword intention proliferated from Yi Ziwen's body and swept across instantly. An extremely sharpened sword intention shot up and cut out an outlet through the sea of swords. The sword key present in the surroundings was actually instantly evaporated in the presence of Yi Ziwen's sword intention. Ah, how can such a sword intention exist in this world? I am afraid experts cannot even dream about congealing such a sword intention in one lifetime. But doesn't Yi Shiwen use a long blade? Now, he is using a sword and is still actually so fierce. Feng Kong is incomparably overbearing, but Yi Shiwen is also a rebellious expert. He actually intends to use the most adept sword attack to counter Feng Kong's sword attack. This is just like Yi Shiwen is trying to humiliate him in front of everyone. Yi Ziwen's terrifying sword strength suddenly shocked a lot of disciples, because they clearly heard that he was a blade master. Then how could he suddenly master sword skills? The truth was that earlier, Yi Ziwen called not use a sword, but he was versatile. People learnt a lot. The proficiency of learning was different for each. Yi Shiwen managed to learn sword skills, and his swordsmanship was even more proficient than experts who were practicing sword skills for years. He broke out the terrifying sword intention, which was the obvious proof of his mastery over the sword skill, which simply shocked the world. In fact, they did not know that there was a mysterious space in the mind of Yi Shiwen, and as long as there were enough spirit stones, he could easily reach the most profound levels of any martial arts or skill. It was simply not a problem for him, and right now, he certainly didn't lack spirit stones. That's how he quickly began to learn sword skill and displayed it in front of everyone. For others, they might need to specialize in one skill in a lifelong process, but for Yi Shiwen, he could practice any martial arts, anytime, whether it was sword, blade, or palm. For him, reaching the profound level for any of these was not a tough job. He believed that someday he would climb to the peak of martial arts, then no one would be able to control his future. The mysterious space actually gave him one kind of confidence that he could master all kinds of martial arts. The source of this sword intention was also very simple. When Yi Shiwen had seen that terrifying sword intention destroying the members of Bai Mo Jiao, at that very moment he firmly imprinted it in his mind, and since then he was crazily burning spirit stones to comprehend it, just to resolve the secrets behind this sword intention. However, he later realized that the sword intention was just too profound and he didn't have the means to completely deconstruct it to learn its secrets. The sword intention he used against Feng Kong was far inferior to the one used by that experts in the tomb, but he felt that this level of sword intention was still enough to cope with Feng Kong. Ugh. Chapter 194, Counterattack. Terrifying offensive, both are amazing. Hua Menghan and some other Core Seed disciples, standing around the Golden Arena, were stunned at the battle scene unfolding in the arena. Although they themselves were Core Seed disciples and were considered elites, they had seen battles between true disciples before, but they had never seen such a terrifying contest between two truth-level experts. If the Golden Arena was not there to impede the aftermath of their attacks, then they would obviously be unable to defend themselves. But while looking at this battle, Hua Menghan was somewhat worried for Yi Shiwen. She was a blurred figure, clad in blue clothes, releasing invincible aura in the arena. "Ah!" Feng Kong shouted loudly, his magnificent body instantly moved, treading on the golden arena and leaving deep footprints on the seabed. The sword reappeared in his hands and he launched the most violent attack. A sword light flew towards Yi Shiwen and seemed to be puncturing the world itself. The sword light went straight towards Yi Shiwen, who was still surfing in the endless sea of sword ki. But how could Yi Shiwen take it lightly? The coiling dragon immediately enveloped his body, as he swept off a supreme sword intention. The released sword ki made a buzzing around, as it echoed its way through the endless sea, surging in all directions. Yi Shiwen's sword intention spread everywhere and stabbed right into the sword light coming towards him and chopped it off. Feng Kong's sword light just couldn't get close to him. Yi Shiwen looked coldly at Feng Kong. At this time, Yi Shiwen appeared untamed and domineering, spewing out terrifying sword intention everywhere. He was like the reincarnation of an ancient king. "Is that it? If that's all you got then today, no one can save you." Yi Shiwen sneered. Everyone was shocked, because no one thought that the battle between these two experts would reach such a horrifying level. Feng Kong was the subordinate of 8th Prince, so everyone knew that he was strong, but no one imagined Yi Shiwen to be so insanely formidable. Yi Shiwen was supposed to be a new star who defeated Luo Yifan, but now, within such a short time, everyone had to accept him as a top-tier expert in his generation. In everyone's expectation, Yi Shiwen was a newbie who should have been defeated in one shot. But now, they got the impression that Yi Shiwen was so strong that even the commander-in-chief of Imperial Guards could not cope with him. Just what sort of monster was he? In fact, they had a feeling that Yi Shiwen was still not showing his true strength. Anyway, they had to accept that Yi Shiwen was on the level of experts like Feng Kong and the other top experts of same generation, though he might not be as good as the 8th Prince, but it was understandable because the practice time for Yi Shiwen was 10 years shorter than that of the 8th Prince and the others. The so-called bullying the juniors didn't work in the world of martial arts because a difference of 10 years could be counted on fingertips and were simply nothing. Looking at the enormous potential of Yi Shiwen, in a matter of few years, he would surpass the 8th Prince. Everyone had a feeling that in the coming 10 or so years, 8th Prince wouldn't be a match of Yi Shiwen. Feng Kong's hair was messy, there was coldness in his sword-like sharp eyes, as he was keeping a close eye on Yi Shiwen. "You really want to die, don't you? Fine, I'll help you out." Zhen Yuan began to overflow from Feng Kong's body, forming a whirlpool and surrounded him instantly, while his sword suddenly flashed, setting off a burst of fearful waves of sword ki towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen was unbridled as he once again swung his sword, releasing the sword intention which when released, produced chaos. The storm of countless swords immediately surged in the surroundings like sea tides with Yi Shiwen at the center. The sword ki released by Feng Kong was indeed fearful, but was simply useless in front of Yi Shiwen's sword intention. In other words, Yi Shiwen simply didn't even budge while facing Feng Kong's sword attack. Yi Shiwen was like a mountain, standing in the way of stormy winds. I like this. There's no doubt that Yi Shiwen's future prospects are limitless, but after this battle he will be legendary. When the battle ends, only one of them will survive. Look at them, have you seen two contenders to possess such killing intention before? This is the determination to kill each other, like immovable rock. The battle was getting intense, more and more tyrannical, and soon, the whole golden arena was destroyed, and the two experts were blasted away all the way from seafloor to the sky. The spectators also followed after them and came out of the sea to watch the battle, now going on in the sky. The battle was getting so intense and horrifying that even the seawater was constantly boiling, endless water was vaporizing. Die! Feng Kong roared and endless amount of lingqi began to gather in the high sky, forming a golden-edged sword, up to several hundred feet long. A huge sword, capable of tearing off the world itself, suddenly fell down towards Yi Shiwen. Boom! Yi Shiwen immediately waved his sword towards the incoming attack, and the two attacks severely collided into each other. Boom! A terrifying blast was set off instantly, producing a piercing and metal-tearing noise in the atmosphere. The spectators felt pain in their ears as a result of this noise, If there were ordinary people present on the scene, then their eardrums would have burst by now. But still, some of the weaker disciples started bleeding from their ears. So dreadful! Did you see that? Yi Shiwen dared to use his own body to tackle Feng Kong's terrifying and huge sword, but he doesn't seem injured at all. Just how tough is his body? Yi Shiwen's body is so tough, amazing. But Yi Shiwen has a weakness. His cultivation level is not as good as that of Feng Kong, who is at Truth 5th stage, whereas Yi Shiwen is at Truth 3rd stage. But that's a short-lived fad. In few minutes, there won't be any difference. Well, yes, it is obvious that Feng Kong is trying to buy time, so that Yi Shiwen ends up consuming his Zhen Yuan. I wonder how long you can sustain. Feng Kong narrowed his eyes. A cruel smile appeared on his face. At this time, he had slight idea that if Yi Shiwen was at the same cultivation level as him, then he would probably be defeated by now. At the same level, perhaps even 8th Prince would have to run for his life. Feng Kong realized that if he allowed Yi Shiwen to grow stronger, then he would pose a serious threat to 8th Prince in the future. So, he must kill Yi Shiwen today at any cost, otherwise the 8th Prince would have no future. Until the time of your death. A cold smile appeared on Yi Shiwen's face. This was a nice strategy against ordinary experts, but unfortunately, Feng Kong was facing Yi Shiwen, on whom rules simply didn't apply in ordinary situations. Each and every one breakthrough was extremely difficult for Yi Shiwen compared to other people, perhaps 100 times or even more difficult, but as a result, the depth of his roots was 100 times more profound. So it was not possible to exhaust him to death, the strategy on which Feng Kong was betting. In fact, there was a possibility that Feng Kong himself would exhaust himself to death. Yi Shiwen didn't have the slightest fear, while the sword danced in his hand. The sword intention was released in the sky, which simply swept away all of the sword ki, keeping it away from his body. The fight went all the way. Over 300 rounds had already gone without any outcome. Everyone seeing this battle could not help but shudder at the sheer level of their battle strength and endurance. Yi Shiwen had not resorted to his full strength. He still hadn't used devil wings and many other means in this battle. He was fighting just with sword skills. It was not like he couldn't use those other means, but he didn't want to. He wanted to defeat Feng Kong by just relying on sword skills. That's how he wanted to break the infinite arrogance of Feng Kong and the 8th Prince. It would take time for them to realize that Yi Shiwen was much more arrogant and despotic than they could ever be. He was way more crazier than anyone else could ever be. Don't tell me that this is the best you can do? Yi Shiwen contemptuously sneered. I see. So if sword skill is your best trait, then you better prepare to kiss your arrogance and false pride goodbye. Don't be so full of yourself. Feng Kong roared and fiercely waved his sword, exhibiting a very scary sword light. The sword key exploded out to the extreme, thereby displaying a gorgeous and invincible scenery in the sky. But no matter how formidable it was still practically useless in front of Yi Shiwen's sword intention. Yi Shiwen simply wouldn't even pay attention to this level of sword attack. Unconventional, heroic, totally lawless, unbridled and basically out of control, these were the traits of Yi Shiwen, a big threat to the so-called 8th Prince and his plan of world domination. Feng Kong knew that he couldn't allow Yi Shiwen to live. Yi Shiwen again used an incomparably overbearing sword intention to nullify his attack. Yi Shiwen was a terrifying opponent, because none of the attacks worked on him, and his opponents never got any other options but to eventually give in and die. Feng Kong roared loudly and spat blood on his sword. The sword burst into tremendous waves of terrifying imposing aura, powerful enough to shake the world. Everyone exclaimed, because this was the most horrifying move used by Feng Kong in today's battle. Could it be that Yi Shiwen would be beheaded by this attack? The Ling Qi in the atmosphere was in crazy turmoil due to this attack. Even Yi Shiwen felt a sense of palpitations. For Yi Shiwen, there was no room for retreat. He immediately shot his sword intention towards the incoming sword light, but it was very small in comparison. It seemed as if everything had quieted down between the heaven and earth, and right at this moment, the sword intention and sword light severely collided. And the very next moment, a loud explosive sound resounded everywhere. Chapter 195, Feng Kong beheaded, bang! From amidst the cyclone, a figure directly flew out and fell into the sea. Ahem! Feng Kong coughed out blood, his internal organs were injured. He was a bit embarrassed, but the killing intention hadn't disappeared from his eyes. Feng Kong's face appeared somewhat pale. He realized that he lost the match of energy exhaustion to Yi Shiwen, because in the previous attack, he used up a large portion of his energy. He put his final bet on this attack but never expected that Yi Shiwen would actually manage to survive. As the blast dispersed, everyone saw Yi Shiwen's figure standing motionless like a mountain. He appeared like an absolute existence, a tyrant-like figure, standing in the center while the sea water was spinning around him. Amazing, the technique just used by Feng Kong is one of a kind. It is said that Feng Kong is the only one in his generation who knows this secret technique. But even a legendary secret sword technique was unable to injure Yi Shiwen, so tyrannical. Feng Kong was unable to display the full might of this technique. If it was used by the sect elders, then you would have seen how powerful it really is. But he still managed to display most of its true might, so I must say that Yi Shiwen is quite amazing to be able to sustain it. Yes, it's absolutely rare for someone from the younger generation to display such a horrifying technique. But the 8th prince used to be at this level almost 10 years ago, so I still think that Yi Shiwen is not his match. You are making a mistake, it's the 8th prince who wants to fight him, not the other way round. 8th prince wants to use him as a stepping stone, as the first page of his world domination campaign, but unfortunately, it seems like it won't be easy to use Yi Shiwen as a stepping stone. I'm afraid it will take a lot more than this. You're stronger than I expected. Feng Kong got up, wiped the blood off the corner of his mouth and looked coldly at Yi Shiwen, but just because of this, you will have to die. I won't allow anyone to come in 8th prince's way, and those who do must die. Feng Kong shouted and Zhen Yuan exploded out of his body. He took one step, and at this time, his killing intention started taking form behind him. A shadow gradually emerged out his sword and was constantly releasing terrifying, imposing aura. With each step of Feng Kong, that shadowy figure would grow taller. Everyone looked at this shadow and felt as if an ancient king had come back to life, and with each step that Feng Kong took, huge amounts of sea water vaporized simultaneously. Countless sea beasts also vaporized along with the sea water. The sword god. Yi Shiwen suddenly frowned and was somewhat startled in his heart. This sword god's incarnation was somewhat similar to the Devil King's ghost, which resided in Tianyuan Mirror. But he was also aware of the enormous amount of energy consumption associated with the use of such a kind of summoning technique. In fact, if he tried to summon the Devil King's ghost from Tianyuan Mirror even once, he would have to burn countless spirit stones. But Feng Kong actually did it. Yi Shiwen carefully observed and saw that Feng Kong's complexion was turning pale, his face was already covered in sweat, gradually dripping down on the ground, and with each step he took, the sword god's coercion would become more powerful and getting closer to Yi Shiwen. Soon, Yi Shiwen was overwhelmed by the fierce coercion of the sword god. What a crazy guy! A thought appeared in Yi Shiwen's mind. The sword god would grow stronger and much fiercer with each step one would take, but at the same time, the energy consumption would be greater as well. Of course, this consumption would be enormous and even Yi Shiwen would not be able to withstand it, so how could Feng Kong possibly achieve it without paying a huge price? It didn't take much long for Yi Shiwen to realize that Feng Kong was not actually consuming his Zhen Yuan, but his life energy. He was basically burning out his life force. Unlike Yi Shiwen, Feng Kong lacked the valuable resource of top-grade spirit stones, especially when there was a requirement of 1,000,000. Such a huge amount was needed to be consumed in order to summon such a giant sword god. Although this sword god was nowhere close to an existence like Devil King, but was more than what Feng Kong could afford at this moment. So he had no choice but to use his own life force. Yi Shiwen saw Feng Kong's original youthful appearance gradually shifting towards an elderly appearance. This so-called 8th prince was really worth it? Yi Shiwen could not understand. Even most of disciples among the spectators did not understand. Although they were unaware of the amount of consumption needed to perform such an attack, but they were not foolish enough to miss the visible change in Feng Kong's appearance. They soon realized that Feng Kong performed this attack at the expense of his own life, preferring to sacrifice himself just for the sake of getting rid of Yi Shiwen. For a warrior, time was precious, and so was their desire to practice and get stronger. Xiantian masters had a lifespan of 200 years, while truth-level masters had a lifespan of 500 years. But even this much time was not enough, and experts needed to spend each and every second of their life to reach the ultimate success of stepping into the legendary level and become an immortal. Although concept of immortality was only stated in rumors, but since lifespan increased with each realm, so people believed that as long as they continued to practice, they would continue to live forever. So even a minute was very valuable for a warrior, let alone a peerless genius like Feng Kong must have spent so many years to reach his current level. He must have spent so much time practicing crazily, but now he was going to lay waste to everything he amassed so far. Finally, that incarnation of the ancient sword god waved his sword. This attack was so tremendous that the space was torn apart. The seawater instantly vaporized and the terrifying sword ki rushed surging towards Yi Shiwen. In front of this attack, Yi Shiwen appeared like an ant, waiting for divine retribution. Yi Shiwen's heart was beating rapidly, preparing him for the upcoming catastrophe, but he had no other choice. He immediately rushed forward and struck his sword, releasing an enormous sword intention towards the incoming attack. Boom! 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 Every collision between Yi Shiwen and the ancient sword god would produce countless air explosions, setting off waves of storm in all directions. Everyone was staring at the scene and thinking how insanely powerful Yi Shiwen actually was. Even while facing such a terrifying power technique, he was actually able to hold his own, and not just that, he also managed to carry on ceaseless counterattacks. There was a hint of blood oozing out of his mouth, but it seemed as if he was not feeling anything. After all, his opponent was burning out his own life energy for the sake of this attack, so when compared to this, losing small amount of blood was practically nothing. Yi Shiwen could feel that the attacks of this sword god were powerful enough to effortlessly slaughter ordinary experts. But as a result of practicing tyrant body technique, his body had become too strong, to the extent that even the incarnation of an ancient sword god was unable to seriously injure him, showing how ridiculously sturdy his body had become. Moreover, hidden inside the Tianyuan mirror, there was an unseen force that was secretly rendering some parts of the attack useless. Otherwise, the injuries wouldn't be limited to just blood coming out of his mouth. It could be said that Yi Shiwen was the epitome of recklessness. Yi Shiwen was holding his own all this time. In fact, now, both sides were trying to hold on. Just the way Feng Kong wanted for Yi Shiwen to exhaust all his energy, now, Yi Shiwen was waiting for him to exhaust himself to death. Yi Shiwen came up with an efficient form of counterattack, a quick fix, in this situation. Immediately, he mobilized Jin Yuan throughout his body and enveloped himself in a protective layer of sword intention, so he was no longer affected by this terrifying coercion. The sword god's coercion was just like Tianyuan mirror's coercion, which was capable of suppressing devils. Yi Shiwen's motive was to envelop himself in the profound sword intention in order to counter the severe coercion of the sword god. You must die. Feng Kong coughed out a mouthful of blood. Half of his hair had already turned white, while at this time, the sword god suddenly waved his huge sword, hurling endless sword ki towards Yi Shiwen. The sword ki spread out in the sky like bright stars, combined into a single entity like a huge tide of countless swords and set off waves of sword ki towards Yi Shiwen. While facing these sword waves, Yi Shiwen suddenly had a feeling of suffocation. Sword waves came surging with enormous amounts of concentrated energy, accompanied by terrifying coercion. Each wave contained the supreme power of sword ki, and even though Yi Shiwen possessed insanely strong body, he could hear his bones produce creaking sound. It was obvious that Feng Kong was going to the extremes, pushing the incarnation of sword god to go all out. He was determined to kill Yi Shiwen no matter what. This attack is so horrifying, no one can face this and survive. Feng Kong is indeed a peerless genius, We can see that from the level of attack he has performed just now. Unfortunately, his legend will die today because even if he manages to kill Yi Shiwen, judging from the overdrain of his life force, there's no way he will survive. Countless disciples were watching this battle and were totally amazed. Even from afar, they could sense the terrifying might of the sword god, but more amazing was the fact that Yi Shiwen was facing this head-on and was still alive. Yi Shiwen was not scared, he was aiming for a stronger counterattack. He clenched his teeth, waiting for the right opportunity to strike. Ahem! Finally, Feng Kong coughed out blood, and with a slight tremor, the large incarnation of sword god suddenly stalled. Ah! Yi Shiwen's sword intentions suddenly began to get bigger and rushed into the sky, straight towards the sword god's incarnation. Poochie! In that moment, the whole body of sword god was cut in half by the endless barrage of sword attacks. At this time, the sword god's incarnation came tumbling down, turned into bits and pieces and scattered in the atmosphere. Poof! Feng Kong spat a mouthful of blood. He couldn't see what happened, but when he gained his senses back, a sword was already put through his chest. It was his own sword, snatched from his hands by Yi Shiwen a moment ago, and then put through his chest instantly. He was done for. His own sword was putting an end to his glorious life, as his blood was slowly trickling down the sword. His consciousness was gradually fading as he vaguely heard some words, echoing in his ears, and a vivid scene appeared in his mind. He was an orphan, his life was simply like a dog who didn't have food to feed himself. Then one day he met his master, who helped him stand on his feet and made it possible for him to become famous as a peerless genius. He still couldn't forget the day he met his master, and the words he heard from him. Let us conquer the world and unify it under one flag, then we will make sure that the kind of pitiful life you had to lead, the same thing will never be repeated for anyone else. Boom! Feng Kong heavily fell down from the sky and his body slowly sank into the sea. Chapter 196, by Ma Jiao's raid. Feng Kong's corpse slowly sank into the sea. Yi Shiwen finally relaxed and was breathing heavily. Although Feng Kong was a domineering guy, who didn't hesitate to bull others if he wanted to, perhaps he was just following the ways of imperial guards, but Yi Shiwen would never forget the last moment when he was slaughtered by him. After witnessing his blind loyalty for the 8th prince, his perception about Feng Kong had slightly changed. The strongest subordinate of 8th prince and the commander-in-chief of imperial guards, who was considered as one of the outstanding figures of younger generation, finally died at the hands of Yi Shiwen. No matter how glorious his past has been, it will all be in vain now. Everyone shook their heads. The battle between these two men was truly far beyond their imagination. No one accepted that someone so terrifying was present in the shadow of the 8th prince, but even after that, in the end he was killed by Yi Shiwen. And Yi Shiwen was even more frightening. He faced the incarnation of Sword God, but still managed to hold his own. Although, he was cornered in the final moments and somehow managed to have a comeback, but his performance far exceeded their expectations. After this battle, Yi Shiwen completely established a dignified impression of himself in the eyes of everyone. Now, no one would dare to underestimate him, and even if he was not as strong as the 8th prince, looking at his infinite, one could say that in another 10 years, he would be able to compete with the 8th prince. Feng Kong's strength was far beyond the expectations of Yi Shiwen. And if Feng Kong turned out to be so strong, then it was needless to say that 8th prince would be much more formidable in all respects. Yi Shiwen's current strength might not be enough, but if he continued to have breakthroughs, he would certainly be prepared for the day when the 8th prince would come looking for him. Yi Shiwen, watch out! Yi Mo abruptly shouted in Yi Shiwen's mind and warned him. Shua! Suddenly, a dreadful killing intention spread out of the blue and a dark cold light instantly appeared in front of Yi Shiwen. It was a dagger aiming straight for Yi Shiwen's throat. Everyone suddenly exclaimed and held their breaths. Could it be that this was going to be the end of Yi Shiwen? Yi Shiwen was startled and instinctively shot a sword intention towards that dagger. Dang! Accompanied with a loud noise, Yi Ziwen was thrown far away and fiercely spat out blood. He didn't even get time to breathe after the battle ended because it was hard to imagine that he would be attacked right after the end of the battle. Thanks to Yi Mo's timely reminder, he managed to barely escape. That dagger was highly toxic, to the extent that it could even corrode reinforced steel frame. At this time, at the place where Yi Shiwen was standing a moment ago, a dark figure suddenly appeared. He was a man, dressed in a black cloak, and horrifying dark aura was creeping out of his body like black snakes. The lightning was embroidered on his black cloak and was exuding a sense of danger, giving rise to a hint of terror in everyone's eyes. It was not hard to guess that this guy was a bad news. Thunder, don't you claim to be known as Great Yu State's deadliest assassin? How come you missed, and a youngster managed to dodge your kill? A voice, filled with mockery, resounded in the surroundings and a figure suddenly appeared from the void. It was none other than Lu Hongwei. Then, suddenly, a large group of Bai Majiao followers and several devils made an appearance. Yi Shiwen felt somewhat tight in his heart, so, Bai Majiao finally made a move. The disciples of the 5 major forces were looking around and appeared horrified. Apparently, they didn't know that Bai Majiao's raid was going to take place on Qinji Island during the competition. Standing at a distance, Qi Fifan frowned, but he seemed all prepared. In fact, there was a vague smile on his face. Thunder, isn't that Great Yu's deadliest assassin? A disciple exclaimed after realizing the identity of this cloaked man. Thunder was a legendary character and quite infamous in Great Yu State. No one knew who he was, where he came from, he just appeared 100 years ago out of nowhere, and suddenly, he became well known as the deadliest assassin of Great Yu. And it was said that he was associated with a famous assassins guild named End of the World Guild. End of the World Guild consisted of a deadly bunch of fierce men, who were willing to do almost anything as long as the reward was to their liking. They were daring enough to take up any job, regardless of the outcome. Regarding the unexpected appearance of Thunder, the best strategy would be to rely on the disciples of Yunqing City, considering the fact that they had a previous experience in dealing with Thunder. In the past, Thunder had made an assassination attempt on the Yunqing City Lord, thought he didn't succeed and was finally surrounded, but later, he managed to escape. After this incident, the news spread like forest fire throughout the Great Yu State and he slowly came to be known as Great Yu's deadliest assassin. Thunder was a legend, he was simply a legend of terror. Although no one knew where he came from, but one thing was certain that his strength was comparable to the experts of half-step legendary realm. Because in the past, one time, he had killed several half-step legendary level old monsters in one fell swoop. Yi Shiwen was feeling a little shaken. If he had not received a timely reminder from Yi Mo, then he would have been unable to escape from this killer attack. Thunder glanced at Yi Shiwen while there was an inevitable look of surprise in his eyes. He did not expect that a junior of Truth 3rd stage would actually be able to escape his attack. Even some of the old guys of half-step legendary level wouldn't be able to escape from his attack. At this time, there was some commotion, and the next moment, a group of gigantic sea beasts emerged out of the sea water and surrounded Qinji Island. The leader of this group was none other than Deepwater Black Serpent King, a half-step legendary demon beast. Its gigantic body was upright and appeared like a mountain, looking very scary. End of the World Guild, I never thought that they would go so far as to collaborate with those devils and go against His Majesty. Don't they realize that they have been brainwashed by these monsters? At this time, the vigorous voice of a middle-aged man echoed in the battlefield. He is clad in a magnificent robe, had a graceful bearing and was also the leading representative of royal clan. His name was Prince Ru. In the early years of his life, Prince Rue early used to follow the great emperor and was once the deputy governor of Great Yu State's military forces. Right now, he was at half-step legendary realm. However, for the children of royal clan, he was a legend-like figure. Cut the crap and stop whining. Lu Hongwei said coldly, "Today, you all are going to die here." Lu Hongwei, I have heard of you. At this time, Qi Fifan approached and said, "They say you are the strongest guy in the younger generation of Bai Majiao. I'd like to exchange pointers with you." "Are you that Qi Fifan? I have heard of you as well, no wonder they call you a legend. At your age, You already have such a profound cultivation level. I never expected that Iyuan school will give birth to a disciple like you. Lu Hongwei smiled, but he seemed somewhat cruel, a bit scary. It is difficult to say who will perish in the end. At this time, yet another calm-sounding voice resounded in the battlefield. Chief Fifan, let me have a go as well. I have been out of action for so long, this might prove to be a satisfying warm-up. Everyone looked surprised at the sudden appearance of a handsome youth, clad in silver-red robe, walking slowly towards others. With the emergence of him, the disciples of Shuling's sect had a sudden boost in morale, because this handsome youth was actually the spiritual son of Shuling's sect. The so-called spiritual son or daughter of Shuling's sect were the main heirs to the position of head in Shuling's sect. This position was comparable to the position of Chief Fifan and other strongest true disciples, who were competing for the position of Iyuan school's head. It was said that from generation to generation, it was almost certain for Shuling's sect's spiritual son to become the head of the main sect. Abominable human, I will chop you into 1,000 pieces. Deepwater Black Serpent King suddenly became furious. He hated humans the most and wanted to slaughter them all. Only then the demon beasts would be able to occupy the land. Do you really think that you stand a chance? Today you have dared to participate in this kind of thing, and tomorrow, your whole family of deepwater black serpents would go extinct from East China Sea. Shuling's sect's spiritual son said quietly, and a strange smile appeared on his face, but provocation was deeply embedded in his tone. You deepwater black serpents are nothing but practice materials, waiting for the day your soul and blood is refined into immortality. Dan. Lu Hongwei, let me deal with this spiritual son of Shuling's sect. I want to kill everyone from Shuling's sect. Deepwater Black Serpent King said in an aggressive tone and was very angry at Shuling's sect's spiritual son. Yi Shiwen was silently watching all this and was a bit surprised. For the indifferent and serious type Deepwater Black Serpent King to become so furious at few provoking words of Shuling's sect's spiritual son was quite unexpected. He was so calm and composed a moment ago, but just few words were enough to expose his irascible nature. This was the legendary skill of using mockery for instigation. Enough talk, aren't we going to kill them all? Thunder said impatiently. You insolent freak, 10 years ago, you tried to break into the palace to assassinate His Majesty. Today, I will definitely arrest you and bring you to justice. Prince Rue suddenly thundered loudly and sprang toward Thunder, and simultaneously shot his palm, releasing endless bursts of thunders. Prince Rue's main power was utilizing the large-scale cooperation of martial arts on the battlefield, but Thunder was better at the art of assassination, but still, the clash between these two martial artists was earth-shattering. They were at same level and equally experienced, so the aftermath of their battle was obviously going to be terrifying. As the two clashed, several Xiantian-level disciples and Bai Majiao followers were blasted away. Chapter 197 Fierce Battle with Devils. The whole scene was chaotic. All of the disciples of 5 forces and followers of Bai Majiao were engaged in a large-scale battle while some disciples were dealing with demon beasts in seawater. Chief Fifan and Lu Hongwei were battling in the midair, and whenever they clashed, it seemed as if the sky itself would split open. A terrifying battle was taking place between bloodthirsty Deepwater Black Serpent King and the spiritual son of Shuling's sect in the sea. From the intensity of this battle, it seemed like the entire sea would vaporize from the amount of energy being released in their attacks. Battle cries could be heard throughout Qianji Island. Both sides were fierce and no one was willing to show any mercy to the enemies. After harboring hatred for so many decades, now there was no use of superfluous words. Whether it was the sky, the ground, or the sea, all turned into battlefields. Corpses were falling down from the sky. Fresh blood changed the color of seawater. It was a rare sight where so many truth-level experts were dying in battle. However, this time, the 5 major forces of Great Yu State, who were never on good terms with each other, had finally joined forces to deal with a common enemy. Yi Shiwen also stepped into the battlefield and began slaughtering the followers of Bai Majiao. Although he was aware of the fact that they could not determine the final outcome of this battle. The final outcome would entirely depend on Qi Fifan, Shuling Sek's spiritual son and Prince Rui. Yi Shiwen continued to advance while killing several enemies along the way. He didn't know how many people had already died since the raid started, and several Yiyuan school's disciples were gathered inside the protection barrier, especially those who were too fragile for this level of war. Boom! A horrifying aura rushed from far away, and along with it, a distant figure instantly flew over towards them. It was actually a half-step legendary devil. His devil wings were fluttering behind his back, and each and every thump of his wings were setting off terrifying storms, accompanied by the loud sound of thunderclaps. The complexions, the faces of all disciples suddenly paled, because they knew that the situation on war had now changed with the unexpected appearance of yet another half-step legendary expert. Moreover, devil experts were inherently fiercer than humans experts. You petty humans, sooner or later, you are all going to be ruled by the devil race. That fearful devil expert said in a loud echoing voice. What do we do now? We do not have another half-step legendary expert. Don't tell me this is the end of us? Human beings are just bags of fresh blood. They are the practice resources who are born just to be killed by us devils someday. The peerless devil experts said in a domineering voice. Correct, you are nothing but a bunch of ants. A crazy laughter was heard by everyone, as a rampant specter suddenly appeared. It was a young devil expert. His body was exuding tyrannical breath, and the souls of several disciples, who were present in his vicinity, were instantly crushed by his presence itself. You are called Yi Shiwen, right? I just saw your battle. You are pretty good. As long as you kneel down and swear allegiance to me, I am willing to take you up as my slave. I'll spare your life and take you with me as a war slave. He rushed all the way towards Yi Shiwen. The human warriors who tried to stop him were all slaughtered by him, and he used a devil power technique to quickly absorb their blood and essence to increase his cultivation level. Keep me as a slave? Yi Shiwen sneered, and sword intention instantly congealed around his sword. It was rotating violently and producing a buzzing sound. You are just a human, and Zhen Wujie would eventually be ruled by devil race. In fact, the whole 10,000 worlds community will be ruled by us. Compared to all that, you are just a tiny existence. The young devil expert sneered. Once these experts are killed, the rest of humanity is nothing but a herd of docile sheep. Everyone was immediately infuriated by his words, because irrespective of which force they belonged to, in the end, they had the common identity of human beings. To be dismissed as slaves, as fresh blood, by the devils would obviously make them angry. I have been in this world for few years but haven't seen a fierce expert like you. You are good, and being a devil prince, I must say that I acknowledge you. So as long as you are willing to surrender to me, that 8th prince, who has challenged you, won't be your match. I will give you supreme devil power techniques, which will make you a superior warrior, and killing 8th prince won't be a tough task for you anymore. The young devil expert said, and it appeared like he really looked down on the 8th prince. Well, you may have been here for few years, but I have been here my entire life, and I have met several excellent human experts, so you better mind your tongue. Yi Shiwen disdainfully said. Humans are weak, nothing but ants in front of us. After I kill you, I will kill other experts from younger generation one by one, including that 8th prince. I hear, you all are considered as the pride of human race. I will turn you all into my slaves, and those who refuse will die. The young devil expert said. Devil, I will be the first to take you on. Qi Fifan shouted, and his extraordinary aura spread wantonly in the midair. He was in front of 2 half-step legendary experts, Lu Hongwei and that devil expert, but he wasn't worried at all. Rubbish, a petty human like you cannot possibly stand a chance against me, the devil expert proudly said. It seemed like he didn't want to intrude into the battle of Qi Fifan and Lu Hongwei. Ah! Qi Fifan shouted, and it seemed as if the whole universe would break down. Sound waves surged in all directions, setting off storms everywhere, and his invincible aura spread in the surroundings. Everyone was shocked when they looked towards the sky and saw a golden figure, which seemed to belong to an ancient god of war. Even Shuling Sek's spiritual son was looking at Qi Fifan with dismay, fear and envy in his eyes. How many years had already passed since he last saw Qi Fifan in action? His progress was simply shocking, and one could see that he had arrived at a very profound level. There was a terrified look on the face of that half-step legendary devil when he witnessed the transformation outbreak of Qi Fifan. Qi Fifan's whole body was enveloped in golden light, and from afar, he looked like the golden god of war, standing between heaven and earth, an invincible existence. Seeing Qi Fifan's transformation immediately lifted the spirits of human experts. As long as Qi Fifan was there to block that half-step legendary devil, they would remain safe. "All right, devil, now I can fight with both of you at once," Qi Fifan said in an indifferent tone, but it was filled with a type of invincible confidence. Even while facing two half-step legendary experts, he was not one bit worried. "You are courting death," the half-step legendary devil shouted, and along with Lu Hongwei, they jointly issued an attack towards Qi Fifan. The attack immediately tore the space, and just like stars were falling from the sky, the attack instantly went across the sky and arrived in front of Qi Fifan. Qi Fifan immediately waved his sword and released a beautiful golden attack, which, when congealed in this world, seemed to be burdening the very existence of space. Boom! Both attacks severely collided, and it seemed as if a star just exploded and filled the entire world with light and magnificence. The war in the sky had already entered into a white-hot stage. 3 half-step legendary experts were engaged in a world-shattering war. Yi Shiwen instantly released the sword in tension towards that young devil expert and said, "Hey devil, I like your idea of keeping war slaves. It seems today, I am going to receive a devil prince as my slave." Yi Shiwen's sword in tension released a terrifying sword light towards that young devil prince. Horrifying Machi burst out of that devil prince's body and immediately wrapped him in a protective cover. At the same time, he released an attack towards the incoming sword light, and both attacks fiercely collided. Boom! This was an earth-shattering collision, which swept off endless shock waves in all directions. The strength of this devil prince was indeed terrifying, but Yi Shiwen had a preliminary understanding that he was actually at the peak of small truth realm, which would make this stronger than Feng Kong. No wonder he was so proud of himself. An enormous blast was swept off around both of them, and none of the spectators dared to go close because the aftermath of these collisions could easily kill them. Yi Shiwen went back several steps and stopped, but before stopping he again released a terrifying sword in tension towards the devil prince. The devil prince also immediately made a counterattack, and the two attacks collided in the sky, setting off surging waves in the sea. Boom! Both of them severely clashed. They used brute strength and collided into each other. A terrible wound appeared on Yi Shiwen's body and his blood spattered. But Devil Prince's condition was much worse, because the sword in tension directly ripped through his body, tearing off a terrible wound, much bleak and worse than Yi Shiwen's wound. It was a terrible collision, the collision solely relying on brute strength. "You dare to hurt me, you petty human, how dare you injure a noble devil prince?" The devil prince was extremely furious and shouted in agony. "Why did I hurt you?" "Well, you are a devil and want to turn me into your slave, that's why I cut you. Is that enough reason for you?" Yi Shiwen smirked and seemed unaffected by his wounds. "You are courting death, no one can hurt me and escape." The devil prince's face revealed a cold look, he roared like a beast, and Machi quickly wrapped his body and also covered the deep wound caused by Yi Shiwen's sword in tension. Devils were much more resilient than human beings. His Machi began to condense and took the form of a ghostly skull. The skull flew into the sky, screaming and shrieking as if accusing the injustice of this world. There was a huge amount of resentment condensed in that skull. Devil Prince's eyes were blood red, full of killing intention, and keeping a close eye on Yi Shiwen. He wanted to slaughter Yi Shiwen in one fell swoop. He was really a killing machine. Chapter 198, Routed, Sky-Shattering Sword. The whole sky was torn off by the golden sword, and terrifying power contained in this attack instantly collapsed the joint attack from the other two half-step legendary experts. This was a terrifying sword attack, simply a masterpiece in its own league. Poochie! The sword attack opened a nasty wound in the body of that half-step legendary devil expert. His blood spattered all over and bone fragments scattered in the vicinity. The half-step legendary devil expert seemed in a terrible state. A moment ago, he had resorted to the supreme devil magical powers, but still could not stop Chi Fifin's sword attack. The power contained in that sword attack was far beyond his imagination, as if the whole universe was still ringing due to its outbreak. Chi Fifin's sword skill was something to be scared of. No wonder he looked so confident, even while facing two half-step legendary experts. That devil's wound was healing slowly, but the terror in his heart had still not disappeared. Just how could a human be so terrifying? The frustration was making him mad. He was depressed because he came to this world thinking he was a predator, but in front of this human expert, he ended up being the hunt instead. And, in addition to that, this human expert was so incredible that he was single-handedly overwhelming two half-step legendary experts. Even Lu Hongwei had a terrified look on his face and a contemptuous look in his eyes, because even though he was considered a genius in the younger generation of Bai Majiao, he was basically nothing in front of Chi Fifin. Now that you have come today, then don't even think about going now. Chi Fifin chuckled loudly. This place is quite beautiful and suitable to be turned into a cemetery for you lot. Chi Fifin once again waved his sword. The golden aura around his body was making him look like a golden god of war, and this time, the sword attack was simply invincible and even more terrifying than the last one. Like a stream of falling stars, the sword attack directly fell towards Lu Hongwei and the devil expert. They tried to block the attack. There was an incomparably terrified look in Lu Hongwei's eyes, and he was kind of angry himself for looking down on Chi Fifin. He had fought with the strongest true disciples of Yuan school in the past, except Chi Fifin, because back then he was only a young junior. But now, Lu Hongwei finally came to know about the horrifying strength of Yuan school's mythical disciple. Chi Fifin was just like a myth. He himself was at half-step legendary level but still managed to overwhelm two experts of same level. At this time, Chi Fifin's extraordinary and outrageous aura swept off. Their joint defense was instantly broken down by Chi Fifin's attack. Both experts suddenly began to scream pitifully as their entire wrists had been cut down and oozing out a fountain of blood. All of the people gasped at this scene, since all of the three experts were at half-step legendary realm, but the gap between Chi Fifin and the other two was too big. Human experts suddenly burst into cheers because Chi Fifin's extraordinary strength had given them immense confidence. What a fearful human, but he must die, otherwise he will pose a huge threat for my people. An intention to kill appeared in the devil expert's eyes. Chi Fifin looked coldly at him. His eyes were exuding golden rays of light. It seemed as if his whole body was made up of gold, just like the golden avatar of an ancient god of war. Today, all of you devils are going to die, so I would like you all to stay here. Chi Fifin said in a mocking tone, and a Zhen method suddenly appeared in the surroundings, and endless sword ki surged out and started flying in all directions. Several Bai Majiao followers and devils were caught off guard and died. This is a trap. Lu Hongwei and the devil experts suddenly exclaimed. They finally realized that their plan had actually leaked, but they didn't have time to find the traitor, because right now, their main focus was on getting out of this trap. Hurry up and withdraw. Lu Hongwei shouted loudly. Since their plan had been seen through by the enemy, so there was no meaning in continuing the raid. Immediately, devils and followers of Bai Majiao began to retreat. Even Deepwater Black Serpent King ordered his forces of demon beasts to withdraw. Thunder and Deepwater Black Serpent King also left their respective battles and escaped. But at this time, Chi Fifin shot once again and released a barrage of sword shadows which instantly rushed towards the escaping Lu Hongwei and devil expert. On the ground, Yi Shiwen sneered and looked at the devil prince whose aura had already risen to the extreme. There was a knife-like sharp look in his eyes. Although now he was in danger, but he didn't seem to care. He was keeping a close eye on Yi Shiwen, and it seemed like he won't leave before killing Yi Shiwen. "Today you must die." The Devil Prince shouted and released an extremely frightening aura in the surroundings. "Now that the situation is reversed, won't you run away?" Yi Shiwen coldly stared at the Devil Prince. Although he said these words, but even if Devil Prince decided to escape, he would chase him and kill him. Yi Shiwen suddenly released his Zhen Yuan, which was released like the terrifying sea of clouds, and a section of it transformed into a coiling dragon. Yi Shiwen's imposing aura was not one bit inferior to that of the Devil Prince. One must know that Yi Shiwen possessed Dragon Qi that had a natural restraining effect on devils. Dragon Qi gave him an overwhelming advantage over devils, but Devil Prince's mochi also couldn't be taken lightly. After all, he possessed noble devil blood. Devils and demon beasts had already retreated far away from Qianji Island, so the battle between Yi Shiwen and Devil Prince immediately attracted the attention of many human experts. Yi Shiwen's aura was full of killing intentions, so no one dared to disturb the two men, even though some people wanted to help Yi Shiwen, but they were scared to go too close. "Ah!" Devil Prince shouted, and his whole body became completely dark. The mochi surged out of his body and completely filled his body with horrifying strength. Yi Shiwen's sword intention was also surging, and his aura was skyrocketing while buzzing louder and louder. It seemed like the entire atmosphere would crack open and the whole world would shatter down with the very existence of this uncontrollably boiling sword intention. Yi Shiwen's coiling dragon was growing more and more stronger and larger in size, and infinite strength of the dragons was totally concentrated in Yi Shiwen's body, making the space around him to tremble. Then suddenly he shot this concentrate energy towards the Devil Prince. The black light and the white light severely collided into each other at lightning speeds, and the blinding flash made everyone to close their eyes. Devil Prince was betting on this final attack. Even if everyone in his team had already escaped, he didn't go, but Yi Shiwen didn't retreat either. This was not just the collision between two attacks, it was a collision between the two races, and Yi Shiwen wanted to prove to everyone that the very concept of devil superiority, when it came to battle strength, was simply rubbish. He didn't retreat, neither did he need to. This was an incredible explosion that seemed to have shook the entire world. Boom! The scary collision of the two fearful attacks collapsed the earth, caused huge amounts of seawater to vaporize, set off countless air explosions, and in the end, the two attacks mutually ablated each other. As the blast disappeared, an inverted figure was sent flying into the sky and fell heavily on the ground. It was actually that young Devil Prince. The terrifying sword intention was stuck on his chest and firmly impaled him to the ground. Everyone saw that this sword intention was crazily devouring his vitality. When human experts saw that this insolent Devil Prince was defeated by Yi Shiwen's sword attack, suddenly, a burst of cheers resounded throughout the battlefield. "Yi Shiwen really won, I told you, this devil is no big deal for him." Yi Shiwen is definitely not a rival of this Devil Prince, but look at the results. Yi Shiwen managed to take him down, even thought he is not yet at small truth level. And I used to believe the legends that devils are superior to human beings, but it seems that the legends are entirely bullshit. All sorts of encouraging messages were floating among the disciples. After all, they always believed that devils was terrible creatures and much more fiercer than human beings, but today's battles completely changed their outlook. Right in front of their eyes, Qi Fifan defeated two half-step experts, one of whom was a real devil. And after that, they saw Yi Shiwen, an expert of truth third stage, defeating a Devil Prince who was at small truth level. Yi Shiwen's battle really inspired many disciples and boosted their confidence, making them believe that even they could fight and win against devils. Now they understood that devils were not some invincible creatures, that even they could be defeated and killed. As the smoke completely dispersed, Yi Shiwen's figure became visible to everyone. Although there was a serious wound across his waist and there was blood all over his body, but there was a calm and composed look on his face. "I cannot die." Devil Prince managed to give one last shout before his eyes gradually lost the light. He had the ambition to rule 10,000 worlds and look down on human beings, but in the end, he died here, and that too at the hands of a human being. Just because you were born as a devil doesn't mean that you are stronger than humans. Anyone can become strong if they have the will for it. You just belong to a group of savage beasts, that's all. A cold smile appeared on Yi Shiwen's face as he said these words. Chapter 199, Obstruct Promotion. Court Death. The battle at Qianji Island ended up in the victory of the 5 coalition forces. Bai Majiao's raid was nullified in one fell swoop, as if getting rid of epidemic, and there were numerous casualties in coalition forces of devils and demon beasts. That half-step legendary devil expert was chased by Qi Fifan and was finally slaughtered. Lu Hongwei managed to escape with serious injuries. Thunder and Deepwater Black Serpent King were also wounded but managed to escape. This could be said as a harsh blow to the arrogance of Bai Majiao and devils. In this battle, 2 men made legends for the entire world to wonder upon. One was the invincible expert who actually single-handedly overwhelmed 2 half-step legendary experts. This was none other than the mythical disciple of Yiyuan School, well known as Qi Fifan. After this battle, 1 more legend was added to the huge list of his legends, sending sensation throughout the Great Yu State. The other was a newly emerging genius named Yi Shiwen. His name spread throughout the Great Yu State and he became an overnight sensation. Initially, his fame was limited within the boundaries of Yiyuan School and few other places, but now, the legend of his achievements completely spread, reaching the far corners of Great Yu State. He defeated the commander-in-chief of Imperial Guards, Feng Kong, and a devil prince back-to-back. The details of these 2 stunning battles quickly spread throughout the Great Yu State through the mouths of the disciples from the 5 forces. The rumor about Yi Shiwen receiving the challenge to a duel from 8th Prince, the strongest in the younger generation of disciples, also spread. Soon, Yi Shiwen became a well-known figure to everybody. In a blink of an eye, 10 days passed since the Bai Majiao raid on Qianji Island. Yi Shiwen slowly opened his eyes in a small courtyard. It took 10 days for him to completely heal the injuries he received from those 2 battles. He fought 2 experts back-to-back and none of the 2 were ordinary experts, especially that devil prince. The good thing was that he received only flesh wound which contained mainly mochi. It was extremely difficult and took him long time to first refine then consume devil prince's concentrated mochi. With the help of Tianyuan Mirror, Yi Shiwen managed to extract mochi out of his wounds. Otherwise, for an ordinary expert, even if they somehow managed to survive, they would at least have to spend a year or 2 to heal up. But Yi Shiwen also gained a lot from these 2 battles. He had to quickly increase the comprehension speed of martial arts in the mysterious space, although his accumulation was still not enough and it should take long time for the accumulation to reach breakthrough level for the Truth 4th stage. Although he rested for 10 days, but it was not in vain. After all, this was the first time he seriously felt the unimaginable gap between himself and some of the country's top experts. Despite being on half-step legendary realm, Qi Fifan was simply invincible and heroic, not to mention he was much more stronger than those old guys at the same level. Initially, Yi Shiwen had become somewhat arrogant, but after witnessing this war, he finally had a realization that he was not strong enough. Well, it's time to go back to Yiyuan School, Yi Shiwen said with a smile. Now, he could go back and get promoted to the rank of a true disciple. Right now, he was officially an inner disciple and there was simply a gap of heaven and earth between an inner disciple and true disciple. I wonder how Brother Qi can possess such kind of strength, Yi Shiwen said with a sigh. Qi Fifan is actually at a level way beyond the half-step legendary realm. Yimo said, he must be practicing some power technique that doesn't let his breakthrough, hence he can have a strong accumulation of power, and once he had a breakthrough he will immediately reach a higher stage of legendary realm. Don't tell me you actually believe that a half-step legendary expert can beat the crap out of 2 half-step legendary experts at once? It is obvious that Qi Fifan has obtained some extraordinary treasure. I don't know what kind of treasure you are hiding, but I can tell this much that 8th Prince will never be a match of Qi Fifan. Yimo said, so if you want to compete for the title of Yiyuan School's head, Qi Fifan is most likely going to be your biggest rival. I'm not interested. Yi Shiwen shook his head and said. By this time, all of the disciples had returned to their respective sects, only Yi Shiwen stayed back to heal. Yi Shiwen opened his devil wings and flew at a lightning speed, straight in the direction of Yuan School. He was much more faster and stronger than experts of Truth 3rd stage, because his battle strength was comparable to small Truth level experts. Only within an hour he arrived at Yuan School, all thanks to the incredible speed granted by his devil wings. Next, the most urgent task for him was to go to Merit Palace and change his identity from an inner to true disciple. Yi Shiwen quickly went into the Merit Palace. There were many people inside the Merit Palace. Some were exchanging demon cores for credits and some were exchanging credits for spirit stones. Yi Shiwen walked all the way and arrived in front of the Merit Elder, responsible for overseeing the smooth operation of Merit Palace. Everyone looked strangely at Yi Shiwen, although Merit Elder was responsible for the functioning of Merit Palace, but there were several low-tier elders for the job. No one dared to disturb the Merit Elder for such matters. Yi Shiwen, what are you doing? The elder said in a somewhat rude manner and looked at Yi Shiwen with his sharp gaze. Several disciples were suddenly startled because they never thought that this young man was actually the famous Yi Shiwen. Although Yi Shiwen's name was well known, but not many people knew his appearance. When they finally knew that this young man was Yi Shiwen, they were suddenly excited. One must know that Yi Shiwen had now become a legendary figure and also the idol of younger generation of Yuan School. Yi Shiwen was surprised for a moment. He did not think before that he would bump into Elder Jin Xian, a supporter of Luo clan. But, since the other party didn't seem to give him face, he would naturally not care about giving respect to the elders. Yi Shiwen indifferently replied, I have come to get promotion. Do you qualify? Jin Xian looked coldly at Yi Shiwen and said, Isn't that your job to find out whether I qualify or not? Yi Shiwen sneered. He knew that Jin Xian was intentionally embarrassing him. I say, you do not qualify. Jin Xian coldly said, Presumptuous, you're just a little merit elder and still dare to arbitrarily decide this kind of thing? Yi Shiwen snorted and loudly said, The promotion of a disciple to the rank of a true disciple was always a major event for entire Yuan School. Although there were hundreds of true disciples in the sect, but this number was the result of hundreds of years of accumulation. And the strength of each true disciple added up to the entire prosperity of Yuan School. Once the merit elder was requested by a disciple for the promotion, he must immediately report to the elders' council and help him get the promotion. Yi Shiwen was simply not afraid of him, although elders held high authority in the sect, but it was only on par with the status of true disciples. In fact, true disciples were much more valuable than the elders, considering that the true disciples represented the hope of martial arts in the sect. They would someday hold the status of a peak head, higher position in the sect, and even the position of sect head was available to the strongest true disciple. And only those who couldn't hold such prestigious positions would one day end up as the elder of the sect. Insolent brat, you dare to talk disrespectfully to an elder, do you want to be punished? Jin Xian coldly stared at Yi Shiwen and shouted. There was an undisguised killing intention in his eyes. Although he heard the news that Yi Shiwen had become insanely powerful, but he didn't believe it. Disrespecting an elder is a big sin. I'll destroy your cultivation. Jin Xian said, and a cruel smile appeared on his face. He instantly shot his palm and a huge hand, congealed out of Zhenyuan, went towards Yi Shiwen. Although he was confident, but he was being careful because he thought that Yi Shiwen possessed strength comparable to true disciples. Damn you! Yi Shiwen immediately became furious. The killing intention surged out of his body and Zhenyuan instantly enveloped his body, like waves of energy, rotating in circular path around his body, with him at the center. Suddenly, the roar of a dragon echoed in the Merit Palace and a coiling dragon appeared out of nowhere and collided with the big hand of Jin Xian. In an instant, Jin Xian's big hand, made up of Zhenyuan, was crushed by the coiling dragon. You're bold, but don't you know that the punishment for raising hand on an elder is death? Jin Xian said in a strict manner, but there was no way he could hide the terrified look in his eyes. How could Yi Shiwen be so powerful? Only 2 months ago, he was not so powerful and he could have easily killed Yi Shiwen if Lin Zhantian had not interfered, but now, his attack was so easily blocked. Chapter 200. Behind the scenes at this time, Jin Xian shot the most powerful attack in the form of horrifying Zhenyuan, surging towards Yi Shiwen. The whole Merit Palace had begun to boil. Don't be so full of yourself. Yi Shiwen sneered and struck with his dragon claw, instantly forming a whirlwind of dragon qi. Boom! In just a flash, Jin Xian's attack was pulverized and the terrifying force present in Yi Shiwen's attack fiercely crashed into Jin Xian and sent his body spinning, which then severely crashed on a pillar and came crumbling down. Standing on the side, several disciples were stunned when they saw this scene. In just one move, Yi Shiwen effortlessly defeated Elder Jin Xian, as if it was nothing. Truth-level power? Ah, Brother Yi is really a truth-level expert, as the rumors said. Yes, truth-level disciples hold high status, even elders do not dare to bully them. But this Yi Shiwen is so arrogant he dared to raise hands on an elder. What elder? This elder is audacious, hasn't he heard of Brother Ye's famous deeds? Even the commander-in-chief of Imperial Guards died in his hands. He is certainly a highly cultured super genius of martial arts, but Jin Xian dares to obstruct Brother Ye's promotion. He is basically courting death. A disciple sneered, "This thing must be reported top elders council, so that from now on, no one dares to offend Brother Yi." God, this Yi Shiwen's strength progresses too fast. I know because I joined Xinyu faction. Last time I saw him, he was not this much strong. A weakling like you wants to obstruct my promotion? Yi Shiwen sneered and looked at Jin Xian, who was miserably groaning on the ground. This was really the biggest mistake of his life. He shouldn't have obstructed Yi Shiwen's promotion. Since the disciples who got promoted to the true disciple rank weren't generally so strong. They usually were on truth first or second stage and couldn't possibly be Jin Xian's opponents, but the same case didn't apply on Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen, stop. At this time, a hoarse voice resounded in the Merit Palace. Yi Shiwen turned around and saw an old man in purple, and right now, there was a sort of smile on his face. Someone had informed the Penalty Palace about this conflict and an elder came to mediate. Elders from Penalty Palace were usually strong enough to be able to mediate conflicts between rebellious powerhouses. Yi Shiwen recognized the pattern on this old man's clothes and found out that he was not just any elder from Penalty Palace, but he was actually the Lord of Penalty Palace. He held one of the strongest positions in Yiyuan School, right under sect head and the peak leaders. Even high-level true disciples were afraid of him, because he was never lenient when it came to punishments. Greetings to Penal Elder. Yi Shiwen cupped his hands and respectfully said. Penal Elder saw the respectful look on Yi Shiwen's face and nodded with a somewhat satisfied smile. He was informed that Yi Shiwen was arrogant, despotic, and very rebellious, but now when he met Yi Shiwen in person, he appeared very humble. But he did not know that Yi Shiwen was simply not a humble person. Yi Shiwen followed the simply rule of tit for tat. He was the type who would return whatever was given to him tenfolds, whether it was respect or disrespect. Yi Shiwen's attitude towards people was completely determined by the attitude of the other side towards him. So Yi Shiwen's enemies would often feel that Yi Shiwen was very arrogant and despotic, while his friends would often feel that Yi Shiwen was someone they could get along with very well. Yi Shiwen believed that harmony between people was possible only if there was respect for each other. If people would give him face, he would also give them face, but if anyone would try to hurt him then he would certainly not show any mercy. What's going on here? Penal Elder asked strictly, but there was no ill intent present in his voice. Yi Shiwen immediately calmed down when he realized that the other party was not actually his enemy. He could sense the aura of Penal Elder and found out that he was half-step legendary expert and his strength was second to only each of the peak leaders and the sect head. This Jin Xian has some ulterior motive. I don't know for whom he is working for, but he just now tried to obstruct my advancement to the rank of a true disciple. Yi Shiwen quietly explained. A smile appeared on the Penal Elder's face. This Yi Shiwen was really a straightforward guy and didn't hesitate to use brute force whenever he was facing injustice. In any case, Jin Xian was an elder of Yuan school, but he tried to suppress a truth-level disciple, which was not something an elder should do. He was the culprit in this case and must be punished. Well, indeed, Jin Xian is really quite audacious. But don't you worry, I will investigate this matter thoroughly and make sure he is punished. Penal Elder immediately began implementing his powers as the Lord of Penalty Palace, because as long as there was violation of regulations, he was eligible to intervene. But was also secretly speechless at the authority of Penal Elder, though Jin Xian was at wrong in this case, but to be able to arrest an elder so easily, this really showed his supreme authority in Yuan school. And one must not forget that Jin Xian was associated with influential Luo clan, so this also showed that Penal Elder was not at all bothered to give face to Luo clan. I heard about your achievements in Qianji Island. Your actions have boosted the prestige of Yuan school. Since your cultivation is already at Truth 3rd stage, so there won't be any problem in give you promotion. Penal Elder said, I will report it to the Elders' Council, and soon, you will become a true disciple. A mountain peak will be exclusively prepared for you as well. When Jin Xian was taken into custody by Penalty Palace, it set off huge commotion in Yuan school, and immediately, Elders' Conference was organized to discuss about this matter. Yi Shiwen is too much, he actually beat up a merit elder, how dare he look down on the sect? Tian Wushuang roared and seemed very angry, which was understandable because he was the Lord of Merit Palace and what Yi Shiwen did was simply like a great insult to him. Wu Patian, the head of a Yuan school, was sitting on the main seat and addressing to the conference. There was a solemn look on his face and no one knew what he was thinking. This thing went really out of hand, especially because Yi Shiwen is involved in it. We all know about his achievements and his importance for our sect, so the matter regarding his promotion to the rank of true disciple must be reported to Elders' Council and should be done properly. It should be very clear that true disciples hold utmost importance in our sect. I don't need to repeat myself over and over, you all already know what I am trying to say. Penal Elder said in a strong tone. Several elders nodded. There had been many disputes in Yuan school, despite the strict regulation by penal code. In fact, it was all to encourage competition among each other for the growth of all, but only few people actually involved in friendly matches and maintained peace. It was simply impossible for everyone to maintain such friendly attitude because people usually held ulterior motives, and forget about disciples. Even some of the elders had their own selfish reasons, so expecting everyone to be selfless was basically impossible. So long as the dispute was still within the scope of control, they could try to calm things down. But the bottom line was that the future prosperity of Yuan school was directly proportional to the number of true disciples. It would directly determine how this sect would perform in the next few hundred years, so no one should look down on such rare valuable treasures called true disciples. Jin Xian indeed did something that was strictly not allowed in Yuan school. No wonder it alerted the Elders' Council and he was dragged away mercilessly by the Penalty Palace. And Jin Xian not only attempted to embarrass Yi Shiwen, he went one step ahead and attacked as well, which strictly violates the regulations of the sect. I even suspect that someone is pulling his strings. Penal Elder coldly said. The other elders didn't answer because none of them believed that Jin Xian had been ordered by someone to attack Yi Shiwen. Who would be so stupid to plan an attack on a war hero like Yi Shiwen? Everyone knew that Yi Shiwen single-handedly defeated a terrifying devil expert of small truth level. Even if right now he was truth 3rd level, everyone had come to see him as someone comparable to 8th Prince. Jin Xian was merely at truth 3rd stage, so who would send him to attack Yi Shiwen? It was just like sending someone to their own death. So one thing was certain, that Jin Xian was not ordered by someone to humiliate and attack Yi Shiwen. When none of the elders said anything, Penal Elder continued, I find Jin Xian as guilty in this matter and he must be punished. Chapter 201, 5th Prodisciple. If you do not punish him, then from here on, no one will obey the regulations of a Yuan school, especially when it comes to such fundamental rules. Penal Elder said. I think Jin Xian elders did not do it intentionally. He must have wanted to test the strength of Yi Shiwen. At this time, Tian Wushuang didn't know what to say in order to protect Jin Xian except to prove Jin Xian as a stupid person who was unaware of Yi Shiwen's strength and dared to get involved in such a matter. The most stupid kind of guy who just wanted to show off his strength in front of a junior. So you think that he is just a stupid guy who tried to test Yi Shiwen's strength? Who would believe such an excuse? Penal elders said coldly, who doesn't know about the events that took place on Qianji Island? It was Yi Shiwen who provided accurate information and helped us avoid what could have been a very serious loss to our sect. And thanks to that vital information, we managed to wipe out the enemy forces of Bai Majiao, and not just that, it also created a very good opportunity for Yiyuan School to set up its reputation as an invincible force in front of the other major forces. In the future, no one would dare to look down on our younger generation. Now, everyone has seen the true talent of Yi Shiwen, but there's a chance that he may have some hidden strengths that we still haven't seen. Various forces have already recognized his strength, and in the future, he is likely to have a duel with the 8th Prince and the other top players of the younger generation. Our job should be to safeguard Yi Shiwen, the only hope of leading our younger generation in this race so that Yuan School doesn't close face in front of other sections. Penal elder said. Although the other elders did not speak, but they clearly agreed with whatever penal elders said just now. Some of the elders wanted to object, but they couldn't do it openly. But objection was clearly visible in their eyes. Such a genius, there's no limit to the amount of care and support we must provide him with. We must not forget that after we old people are not there to protect the sect, we will have to rely on the younger generation to ensure the safety, security of Yuan School. Only they will be able to maintain our sect's elaborate reputation and keep it going in the future. Penal elder said and glanced at those elders who were showing signs of objection through their eyes. Everyone suddenly turned their faces sideways and looked at each other. After all, none of the elders participating in this meeting were at low rank. All of them held high positions and were extremely old, to the extent that most of them would not live another 100 years to look after the well-being of their sect. And how old was Yi Shiwen? He was merely about 20 years old, and his cultivation would grant him a lifespan of about 400 years, which was an entire generation of life. Today, if they really offended such a peerless genius, then in the future, looking at Yi Shiwen's promising talent and unimaginable growth rate, perhaps, they might have to face serious consequences. By then, in their absence, Yi Shiwen would have surpassed them all, and even their successors might also have to face Yi Shiwen's wrath. Yi Shiwen had so much potential and talent that in the future, he would most likely become a peak leader, and later, he might even become the head of Yuan School. Was it really worth to offend Yi Shiwen? After witnessing the recent events, now, no one would dare to underestimate Yi Shiwen, because they had come to realize that Yi Shiwen's talent was actually transcendent. They felt somewhat strange in their hearts, trying to figure out why was Penal Elder helping Yi Shiwen. They didn't know that Penal Elder was doing this to give a serious blow to Luo clan's influence, which would ultimately also affect Chu Jingsai's influence. Also, he wanted to tie a friendly knot between Huang Luoqin and Yi Shiwen, because this would ultimately increase the influence of Huang Luoqin. So long as one had enough common sense, one would not want to offend Yi Shiwen and certainly wouldn't try to make an enemy out of him. Penal Elder wanted to win over Yi Shiwen's trust and support for Huang Luoqin. If Yi Shiwen agreed to join Huang Luoqin's faction, then that would be a great addition and would certainly give a boost to his influence over other pro-disciples. And even if Yi Shiwen doesn't agree to join, after growing strong in the future, he would certainly support Huang Luoqin and would be just like icing on the cake. Yi Shiwen demonstrated endless potential and no one could predict how strong he would become in the future. So it was for the best to not offend such a person, and an experienced old guy like him certainly understood such a basic point. Everyone looked at Wu Padian and waited for him to state the final judgment. Wu Padian, at this time, no longer looked indifferent, instead he glanced at the crowd and said, Jin Xian will be stripped of his elder's identity and sent to guard the mines. That's my final decision. Suddenly, everyone was shocked in their hearts. Getting stripped of the identity of an elder, for Jin Xian, it was worse than dying. There were no small benefits for elders which were especially necessary for later practice because as the cultivation grew, more and more practice resources were required for further advancing to the next realm. After all, not everyone was daring like Yi Shiwen, who roamed about everywhere and plundered many resources whenever required. For most people, the resources granted by sect was the main source of strength and also the safest way. Without the resources granted by the sect, Jin Xian's further practice would be extremely difficult, and considering his almost finished lifespan, it was a very serious punishment. But since the head had already made a decision, including Tian Wushuang, no one dared to refute. One more thing, Yi Zaihui needs to be immediately promoted to the rank of other 4 pro-disciples. Wu Potion's next sentence suddenly startled all of the elders, because everybody expected him to be promoted to the rank of true disciples. Whether it was strength or credit, Yi Zaiwen had more than enough. Yi Shiwen indeed deserved to be promoted to a true disciple. But to be placed among the 4 strongest true disciples was simply unexpected for everyone. It could be said that although there were hundreds of true disciples in Yuan school, but only the most distinguished and peerless geniuses were allowed to be called as the pro-disciples, and only they were allowed to compete for the position of head. These pro-disciples held strength, prestige, and personal connections, making them much superior to other true disciples. Pro-disciples were considered elites even among the elites like true disciples. In the past 100 years, there were only 4 who managed to achieve this rank. But today, Wu Padian unexpectedly added Yi Shiwen to the same rank, which suggested that Yi Zaiwen would have such an elaborate and promising future that his success might be comparable with that of the 4 pro-disciples. The last time when Wu Padian made such a judgment, Qi Fifan had an extraordinary rise in both fame and strength. At that time, no one expected that Qi Fifan would become such a legendary expert in the future, but Wu Padian was able to make a correct judgment about him. This was the second time Wu Padian made such a judgment, so did it mean that Yi Shiwen would become a possible future rival for Qi Fifan? But while they were extremely dismayed, no one dared to question Wu Potion's decision. Yuan School's inheritance was an accumulation of so many years, and they certainly focused on cultivating geniuses. As long as they could nurture a true genius, the sect was willing to devote a lot of resources for it. This was also one of the main reasons how Yuan School was able to stand tall for so many years. I hope everyone is aware of the declaration of duel to Yi Shiwen from the 8th Prince. Wu Padian looked at the crowd and asked. Everyone nodded. This duel will be cancelled. No matter what happens, it must be cancelled. Wu Padian said, Yi Shiwen's practice time is still short. This duel will be scheduled to some other time, when he is sufficiently strong to be able to deal with 8th Prince and the others. Yi Shiwen is the new backbone of the younger generation of Yuan School. We cannot afford to lose him. All of the elders nodded because they too agreed with Wu Potion's idea. After all, expect Yi Shiwen, no of the other disciples lived up to the expectations. One must know that Luo Yifan was considered the leader of younger generation in Yuan School, and he was nothing compared to the 8th Prince. The gap between them was extremely big, but Yi Shiwen rose up as a new ray of hope for Yuan School. While dealing with an evildoer, let evildoer do the job. Thinking about it, when Qi Fifan rose to fame, none of the other major forces was able to put forth a strong rival for him, making them utterly depressed. In fact, a lot of people said that perhaps Qi Fifan took birth in the wrong era. He should have taken birth in the era of 8th Prince. Then Yuan School wouldn't have to face such embarrassment. In the recent years, Yuan School couldn't produce a competent rival for the 8th Prince. But now, finally, Yi Shiwen came into picture, showing the ability to compete with 8th Prince and the other top players in same generation. It would generally take a lot of time and resources to nurture a peerless genius, but now, with the unexpected rise of Yi Shiwen, they would certainly not let him die early. Yuan School had sufficient grounds to protect Yi Shiwen. Quite simple, Yi Shiwen was significantly younger than 8th Prince, so he must be allowed to train for 10 more years, then he would have the ability to compete with the 8th Prince. Unconsciously, they were all very confident of Yi Shiwen. After all, despite being so young, if he was able to kill Feng Kong, the commander-in-chief of Imperial Guards, then in the next 10 years, People believed that he would at least catch up with 8th Prince and the others. Everyone wanted him to defeat the 8th Prince. If the 8th Prince doesn't stop, then I will personally go into action and protect Yi Shiwen, Wu Padian said in a cold voice. Chapter 202 Qinyu Peak. The news about Yi Shiwen's promotion to a pro-disciple stirred things up in Yuan School. Everyone was waiting to learn about what happened with Jin Xian, but they never expected such an outcome. The news spread like wild forest fire that Elder Jin Xian was deprived of his elder's identity and sent to guard a mine, whereas Yi Shiwen was promoted to the rank of a true disciple, which was an obvious result. But gaining the rank of a pro-disciple shocked everyone. Of course, this time, the value of a merit elder faded away in front of Yi Shiwen, the long-awaited priceless star of the sect. But everyone was surprised to find out the head himself promoted Yi Shiwen to the rank of pro-disciple. The same thing happened once before with Qi Fifan. He took the place of 4th pro-disciple and he later became a legend in Yuan School. And now, after Qi Fifan, Yi Shiwen took the 5th place. Last time, just when Qi Fifan had become a pro-disciple, there was a sudden growth in his popularity. There was also a sudden rise of his faction, both in terms of strength and size, and thanks to that, his followers had also received great advantages. So now it seemed like Yi Shiwen would also have a similar rise like Qi Fifan had, and many people wanted to take advantage of this opportunity. After all, anyone would want to wash hands in a flowing river. This Yi Shiwen is really too incredible. The elder Jin Xian was not only beaten by him but was also deprived of his elder's identity. Well, of course, Yi Shiwen has become the 5th pro-disciple, whereas Jin Xian is merely an ordinary elder. There's no comparison between the two. I tell you, this Yi Shiwen is simply a legend, a myth, and now with the rise in his status, the disciples of Qinyu faction will have a meteoric rise in strength and status. It's no longer the faction of newbies, because now, it belongs to a pro-disciple. Unfortunately, I did not join early, and even if I go now and join Qinyu faction, I am afraid I won't be able to get the higher ranks. Yes, even the head said that he is personally going to protect Yi Shiwen. I was worried that Yi Shiwen might be killed by the 8th prince, but now I am assured that within the protection of our head, even if the 8th prince dares to come, he will meet his tragic end. Everyone was discussing about Yi Shiwen. But for Yi Shiwen, the most important thing was to receive control of Ophi's peak from the sect. It was a tall mountain and it seemed as if the peak of this mountain was floating in the sky. Without taking much time, Yi Shiwen named it Qinyu Peak. Anyway, he had decided the name long ago, so he didn't spend much time while naming it. And afterwards, Qinyu Peak would become the permanent residence of Qinyu faction and all of the disciples of Qinyu faction would over there to live. Not to mention, the size of Qinyu Peak was more than enough to accommodate thousands of people. But as of now, there were few hundred disciples in Qinyu faction and accommodating them should not be a big deal. Not to mention, most of the disciples still lived in their respective 10 peaks, so basically, not even 100 disciples were going to live on Qinyu Peak. It was a great news for Qinyu disciples because their leader, Yi Shiwen, not only became a true disciple, he also became a pro-disciple with only 4 other at the same rank. There was a heaven and earth's difference between an ordinary true disciple and a pro-disciple. Yi Shiwen took control of Qinyu Peak from an elder, and the first thing he did was to give full access to Qinyu faction. This peak was already like a war fortress with several Zhen methods for attack and defense, but they only activated in the most critical situations, and under normal circumstances, there was no way to activate these mechanisms. Yi Shiwen was not satisfied with the defense mechanisms and directly deployed the poisonous dragon water control flag array. Several deepwater black serpents congealed out of nowhere and completely surrounded the Qinyu Peak from all directions. It seemed as if the peak was being invaded by these serpents and the defense mechanisms immediately activated. But as suspected, these defense mechanisms were not satisfactory. However, Yi Shiwen's poisonous water dragon control flag array was enough to serve as a formidable defense for the Qinyu Peak. And most importantly, there was a spiritual artery buried on Qinyu Peak, although the Lingqi present was not generally sufficient, but since the flag array would be perennially buried in the spiritual artery, so over time, it would continue to enhance the quality of the flag. In fact, even Yi Shiwen couldn't make a guess about the rise in energy with the passage of time. Of course, if necessary, Yi Shiwen could come back at any time to protect Qinyu Peak. After Yi Shiwen acquired control of Qinyu Peak, it didn't take long for the news to spread throughout the sect, and soon many people, who were already interested in Yi Shiwen's strength and glory, discovered that right after he entered the Qinyu Peak, several deep-water black serpents came out of nowhere and surrounded the peak. They were roaring non-stop and their killing intention was crazily soaring in all directions. And since now the flag array was rooted into the spiritual artery of Qinyu Peak, it was able to display far more power when compared to how it used to perform in the hands of Yi Shiwen. What a terrifying killer Zhen method! What kind of killer Zhen method has Yi Shiwen buried in his peak? His killing method has taken over the sky itself, waiting to attack the prey. What is this killer Zhen method? How come I've never seen it before? An elder said and looked at Yi Shiwen, who, at this time, was planting the poisonous dragon water control flag array into the spiritual artery. The gazes of many true disciples, elders and other powerhouses were glued to Yi Shiwen, and the reason was quite simple. They just wanted to learn more about the fifth pro-disciple of the Yuan school and would he be able to create legend like Qi Fifan. Immediately after Yi Shiwen was done burying the flag array, suddenly, Lingqi gushed out from Qinyu Peak and completely enveloped it in large stalks of surging Lingqi. Everyone looked at this scene with a look of terror and shock in their eyes. What's going on? From where did all this Lingqi suddenly emerged onto the mountain peak? It seems like a Zhen method which forcefully extracts Lingqi out of the spiritual artery and then seals it off. Yes, extravagant, and if this continues, soon, the huge concentration of Lingqi on the peak will eventually liquefy, but this way the spiritual artery will be consumed very fast and may get depleted within a century or so. What are you talking about? He has managed to extract Lingqi faster from the spiritual artery. The sect would definitely praise him for it. Yes, we should not forget that now he is a pro-disciple and owns superior treatment even when compared to true disciples. Most of the disciples were envious but were rather more shocked, because they did not know how Yi Shiwen managed to get his hands on so many top-level Zhen methods. Including many of the true disciples, even the elders were in a state of shock, because in such a short time, Yi Shiwen managed to implement such a potent Zhen method that it was basically sucking Lingqi out of millennium's old spiritual artery. From where did he grasp such a powerful Zhen method? Such concentration of Lingqi was almost comparable to the Holy Lands of Yuan school, which were formed only after many years of conservation. Although there would be a shocking consumption rate because of this, but in general, it would do more good than harm. Especially, a lot of forces were still holding hostility for Yi Shiwen, but now that they saw his performance with their own eyes, they came to realize that his capabilities were already far beyond their imagination and it was literally impossible to deal with him. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Yi Shiwen, the fifth pro-disciple of Yuan school. Just now, I acquired a mountain peak of my own and named it Qinyu Peak. From hereby onwards, it is going to be the residence and headquarters of Qinyu faction. Later, if I find out that someone tried to aim their evil intentions towards Qinyu Peak or my people in my absence, I will make sure to obliterate your existence from this world. Yi Shiwen's voice burst out from Qinyu Peak and spread throughout Yuan school like a storm. Everyone was secretly speechless after they discovered the depth of Yi Shiwen's skill. To be able to send his voice surging and trembling throughout the expanse of humongous Yuan school was not something an ordinary true disciple could achieve. Just how unimaginably deep his skill actually was, and was he really a true third-stage true disciple? After listening to his overwhelming battle cry-like announcement, although many people still could not pinpoint his strength level, but at least now they understood why he was made a pro-disciple by the head. Qinyu faction is really lucky. Having a pro-disciple in the faction means their future prospects are simply unimaginable. Not to forget, disciples of Qinyu faction are going to live in a practice environment of Qinyu Peak which is rich in Lingqi, which is concentrated enough to be on the verge of liquefying. Only top-level elders, peak leaders and head of the sect are able to access such a kind of practice environment but now it accessible to Qinyu faction. It's like they are going to get the same treatment as top elders and leaders of the sect. In such a short time, Yi Shiwen not only became a true disciple but also managed to obtain the title of a pro-disciple. But looking at his qualifications, it will still take a lot of time for him to achieve the level of other 4 pro-disciples. Yes, but you must consider the fact that other 4 pro-disciples have been around for decades and almost a century, but in comparison, Yi Shiwen is just 20 years old and still became a pro-disciple. But just think, he is just 20 years old and has a lifespan of 400 years. There are so many decades left for him to break through the heavens. With his talent and the kind of importance he holds for the sect, unless and until he doesn't end up dead in some conspiracy, I'm afraid his future prospects are extraordinary. That you're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.